We've got a 2-minute warning, General, until Larry Fleischer comes in the briefing room, and it might be the perfect time, since I like concentrating, focusing in on the stories of some of the individuals. Tell us a thumbnail sketch of the battalion commander we met who is taking this first line of armor through with the third ID. He appeared to be a young guy, good sense of humor, and according to what I heard from you in the car on the way back, a terrific warrior with a great future in the Army.
Yeah, I think we'll leave him unnamed right now because it was
that goes unsaid.
It was a background type interview that we had. I mean, just a very, very capable guy. Was over here as a young officer during the first Gulf War. A lot of combat experience there.
Very representative of the guys on the way up.
Yeah, actually, very confident, very well spoken. Had a good plan, had a good sense of not only the strategic significance of what he was going to do, but also the political significance. One of the things that really impressed me with this young colonel was the appreciation that he had, that he did not want to unduly destroy the Iraqi army nor the Iraqi infrastructure. He was going to do what he had to do. But he was sensitive, and not only was he sensitive, his troops were sensitive to this political dimension. That's kind of new, Brian.
Yeah.
I mean, generally, you take infantrymen, armor guys. I mean, these guys are tough guys. They're frontline guys. You give them one mission. You don't let them have to worry about this other stuff.
Orders are orders, yeah.
Exactly. This war is more complex with this regime change. So I was very impressed with how he's conducting himself. The other thing is very impressive with the MDs.
It'll have to wait. Here's Larry Fleischer.
Good afternoon. I'd like to give you a report on the President's Day and then take whatever questions may be on your mind. The President began today when he received a 6 o'clock phone call from his National Security Advisor providing him with an overnight update on events in Iraq. The President arrived at the Oval Office at 6:55. Upon arrival, he later had his intelligence briefing, followed by an FBI briefing. He met with the Secretary of Defense. As we speak, he is having lunch with the Vice President. He will convene a cabinet meeting later today at which the President will welcome the pool. The President, at the cabinet meeting, will discuss the developments in Iraq, remind the cabinet of the importance of this mission of disarming Saddam Hussein, and he will also, on the domestic front, remind cabinet secretaries of the importance of pushing ahead with a busy and important domestic agenda, even in the middle of international events. Tonight, the President will meet with the President of Cameroon in the Oval Office, and he will dinner with the President of Cameroon. Before I take your questions, there's one item I would like to point out to you. The President would like to thank the growing number of nations that are joining the coalition of the willing to disarm Saddam Hussein. As of today, there are more than 35 countries currently committed to the coalition, and that number is growing. Contributions from nations include direct military participation, logistical, intelligence, and political support, specialized chemical and biological response teams, overflight rights, and humanitarian and other aid. Nations include, and this is just a partial list, Australia, Bulgaria, Hungary, Italy, Japan, the Netherlands, Poland, Portugal, Romania, Spain, Turkey, United Kingdom. Turkey, of course, today in their parliament voted to grant overflight rights to the United States and to the coalition. It's no accident that many members of this coalition recently escaped from tyranny and oppression, and they understand what is at stake in bringing freedom and liberation to the Iraqi people as the mission of disarmament continues. All told, the population of the coalition of the willing is approximately 1.18 billion people around the world. The coalition countries have a combined GDP of approximately $21.7 trillion. Every major race, religion, and ethnic group in the world is represented. The coalition includes nations from every continent on the globe, and for this the President is grateful. And I'm happy to take your questions. Ron?
Has Saddam Hussein or any of his leadership been killed or captured?
Any questions dealing with anything operational will, as was the routine in 1991, has been made clear on many occasions, be addressed by the Pentagon, not by the White House. Helen?
Is there any indication that Saddam Hussein will accept exile, and is that offer still on the table?
We continue to hope that Saddam Hussein will leave Iraq. We continue to hope that Iraqi generals will not follow orders. It is not too late for them to do that. It is very important that the President has said that Iraqi generals, Iraqi troops lay down their arms and not engage in combat. This is not their battle. This is not their war. This is a war to disarm the Iraqi regime from its weapons of mass destruction. It would be a welcome event if Saddam Hussein were still to flee.
Was the mission a success, in general terms?
Ron, here in the very early days, the earliest hours of the disarmament mission, I'm not going to provide a play-by-play coverage of it. The President has every confidence, as the American people do, in the men and women of our military to achieve their objective, which is to disarm the Iraqi regime. He has every confidence that will be done, but I'm just not, as a general matter of principle, going to provide daily, minutely TikTok like that. But when I say the President has every confidence, it's for good reason. Bill?
You've emphasized the support that the coalition is getting, but there's been substantial criticism as well, particularly from President Putin of Russia. What's your response?
Well, again, the President is very gratified by the growing list of nations that support the coalition's efforts. The differences that the President has had and the United States has with a few other nations are well known. There's nothing new to that. The President understands and respects the opinions of leaders like President Putin. Nevertheless, that will not deter the United States and the coalition of the willing from disarming the Iraqi regime.
Going to damage U.S.-Russian relations?
I think that in the many conversations that President Bush has had with President Putin, the two of them have stressed that while on this issue they disagree about whether the use of force is appropriate to disarm Saddam Hussein, relations between the United States and Russia are too important for anybody to let them be damaged. The President doesn't believe they will be. No. Campbell?
All right, you noted that Turkey had granted overflight rights. What did we offer Turkey in exchange for overflight rights? And Turkish troops are now moving into northern Iraq. Are they working with U.S. forces in northern Iraq?
In terms of Turkey, this was a vote put to their parliament. Their parliament voted for it. Turkey, of course, is a NATO country and a NATO ally. Previously, there had been discussion of a package of aid for Turkey that was contingent on Turkey's acceptance of a total cooperation package. That did not develop, and that package is not on the table, and that package will not be on the table. So we appreciate Turkey's acting as they have. I have nothing for you on the second part of your question.
Can I just ask on a different subject? With the war having begun, you've said that this is essentially in the hands of the military planners, that most of the day-to-day stuff you'll refer to the Department of Defense. But to what extent is the President involved in decision-making on operational issues?
Well, the President has given the military the broad parameters and, of course, the definition of the mission. And the mission is the disarmament of Saddam Hussein. The President then delegates to the Department of Defense the operational details of how best to accomplish that mission. The President monitors it very closely. The President speaks, as you know, repeatedly throughout the day in the private meetings that I mentioned with Secretary Rumsfeld. He receives updates from the National Security Advisor throughout the day as well to ascertain whatever facts are the latest. He asks questions to verify what progress is being made, and that's the President's role.
But the military no longer would require a final go-ahead from the President now that things have begun.
No, there's a war plan that has been developed over a considerable period of time that the President was involved with the stages of the development of it, the approval of it throughout those stages, and now that plan is being implemented. Terry?
What's the current assessment of the White House about that videotape shown in Baghdad shortly after the strike of Saddam Hussein, or someone looking very much like him, speaking to the Iraqi people?
We have reached no conclusions about that videotape as to whether that is or is not Saddam Hussein, or what time that may or may not have been pre-recorded. We've reached no conclusions.
So there's a doubt as to whether or not that's even Saddam.
Well, obviously there are two issues in play. Is it Saddam Hussein or not? We've reached no conclusions. Was it pre-taped, pre-canned? We've reached no conclusions.
Okay. And then on Turkey, did you just tell Campbell that Turkish forces may be entering in Iraq?
Campbell said to me that Turkish forces were entering Iraq. I said to her, I have nothing on that.
Thank you. It is part of the agreement with Turkey that they will be under the unified command structure of the coalition.
Nothing has changed from any of our previous conversations on it. Steve?
Walk us through the executive order last night, Larry.
Let me back up one step. I've been getting many questions from the press, as is appropriate at a time like this, for what the press calls TikTok, or what people understand as tell us everything that happened in every step along the way, how decisions were made, which of course is an issue of very important historical value. As you can imagine, The military planners, Secretary Rumsfeld, Dr. Rice, the Vice President, the people who are in the room with the President for these meetings are focused on other things right now. They're focused on winning a war. That's their first mission, and that's where their time is being spent. I have confidence that at the appropriate time we will have sufficient information to pass along more of a tick-tocky nature that is appropriate and is important in this White House determination to try to provide it. But at this point I'm very constrained in how much details I can get into as a result of what the principals are spending their time on. So, Dick?
Does the President have any second thoughts about whether by launching a limited opportunistic strike last night against the Iraqi leadership, he gave up any of the element of surprise of the main attack or complicated its execution in any way?
I believe your words were limited opportunistic strike. The President's words were the opening phase of disarmament. And that's how the President views this. This was the opening phase, the early stages of disarmament as part of a broad mission whose goal is the disarmament of the Iraqi regime. And in that mission, the President has every confidence that it will be achieved. So the answer is no.
Okay. Both the President and Secretary Rumsfeld over the last few days have warned the Iraqis against sabotaging, destroying oil wells. Secretary Rumsfeld suggested this morning that that, in fact, was happening. To what degree do you have concerns that that would complicate your ability to finance reconstruction efforts there? And more generally, what efforts are you making to reach out to other countries at this point to pay for any reconstruction there? Okay.
Let me make several points on the question of the situation involving energy and this action that we have seen. We have received reports from our forces that a small number of oil wells in southern Iraq are on fire. We have no additional details or no information on the extent of the damage, and the exact nature of the extent of the damage is a terribly important thing when it comes to actually determining if this is a serious event or not a serious event. The United States and its international partners anticipated that Saddam Hussein's regime might attempt acts of sabotage against oil wells. By doing so, Saddam Hussein is trying to destroy the wealth of his own people and once again showing the world that he lies, because if you recall in a recent interview that Saddam Hussein did with CBS News, he was asked if he would take this step and he said he would not, that the Iraqi regime does not burn its own oil wells. Clearly we have some evidence already this morning in a small number of cases to the contrary, which is a reminder of what this war is about, the very fact that Saddam Hussein will lie. And the issue is his lies about his possession of weapons of mass destruction. World energy supplies are more than adequate to compensate for any disruption these acts may cause. Saudi Arabia and other major energy suppliers have increased production, and their exports are proceeding normally in this regard.
And on the issue of reconstruction costs and other countries'
Well, I think it's impossible to make any estimations based on this action. As I mentioned, it's a small number of wells, and the extent of the damage is not ascertainable at this time. Mike?
All right, what are the President's benchmarks for success in this campaign?
The President's benchmark for success is the disarmament of the Iraqi regime. That is what has brought the world to war in this case. What has precipitated the use of force was Saddam Hussein's refusal to go along with the United Nations resolutions that required him to disarm. And in this action, the United States is enforcing the resolutions of the United Nations.
How will you know when disarmament has occurred?
There will be a series of military events that you will now witnessing, and you will be kept informed throughout the progress of those events.
What about Saddam Hussein?
You'll be kept informed of the progress of all events, including the leadership structure of Iraq.
No, I'm sorry. What I meant was, what has to happen to him? What has to his status be for this campaign to be a success?
I think the focus is on disarmament, and disarmament is achieved as a result of numerous military actions that are being taken, and command and control is one of those actions that gets taken in the course of combat. And I'm not going to go beyond that and make any predictions of outcomes for any individuals. John?
Two questions. First, on Saddam Hussein, in response to Helen's question, you said the administration would still welcome it if he left Iraq. Is that a reflection that it is at least the early belief that he survived last night attacks, and if Saddam Hussein or anyone in the senior leadership requested safe passage, is it too late for that now that hostilities have begun, or would the United States?
No, you should not read my answer to be one way or another on anything involving bomb damage assessment. As you know, bomb damage assessment is ongoing, and you should not take that answer to be one way or another. You should take that answer to be a repetition of the statement that's been made often here about Saddam Hussein should leave the country.
On the question of safe passage, if he or anyone in the senior leadership suddenly requested it now, would the United States say yes, or would the United States say too late?
Well, if Iraqi leaders turn themselves in, that would be a very welcome event.
Turn themselves in. That's
turn
not
themselves
request
in,
safe
or
passage.
turn themselves in, or leave the country. Requesting safe passage means you're turning yourself in essence, because you are contacting somebody for the permission to pass through. Any step that would remove Saddam Hussein from power will be welcome. Ed?
I have a follow-up to Mike's question, and I have a separate one. Are you saying that regime change, I assume you're saying, remains the policy and goal in this
I
campaign?
mean, one thing you can rest assured of is after a military action is to disarm Saddam Hussein's regime, we have no intention of leaving Saddam Hussein in charge of Iraq.
And the president said 2 weeks ago that once hostilities began, he would inform the American people and Congress on the range of possible costs, financial costs. When can we expect that?
No date has been set. It is a matter that is under review, and once a determination is made, it will be provided. Jim?
I'd like to talk for a moment, if we could, about the president's role in the general planning for this. We've had the general idea that the president had already given the go-ahead to the military, authorized them to move at their discretion when the circumstances were best. Is that accurate?
That's correct.
But in this case, he had to be involved in making the decision and giving the execute order for this particular operation for what happened last night. Why did the president have to be involved?
Well, I think you're going to see in the course of combat numerous operations of various natures take place. There will be many discussions here at the White House. I do my best to give you a description of the meetings that the president has without getting into the details of those meetings. And it's during the course of those meetings that the president is informed about progress in the military action, and the president is informed. The president lends his judgment, and there are different matters that require different levels of approval, and it all is a matter of the ongoing conduct of the operation.
In other words, in this particular case, the timing and the nature of the operation required presidential approval that would not have been required just for the beginning of the war as it had been planned for some time.
Well, again, there will be numerous items in the conduct of the war that involve operations at differing levels. Some of those levels may involve discussions or approval from the president, others may not.
Can you give us some sense of to what extent the information that was received last night that prompted this particular mission jumped the schedule that had been anticipated and planned?
No, I'm really not going to get into any type of operational decision-making or timing issues, things of that nature. That's not something that I can do. Gene?
First of all, do you have any readout on phone calls?
The president has been making a large number of phone calls over the last several days now to leaders all around the world. He has reached out to leaders in every corner of the world, from a number of Arab leaders who are important to leaders in other nations and other continents. It's a very large volume of calls between yesterday and today. I did not bring with me the specific list of all those calls. It's a large number today.
You posted as is your policy.
Yeah, let me see what I can do on providing more specifics later. And the calls are still ongoing, too.
And the point of the calls?
The point of the calls is to touch base with world leaders about the military operation, to talk to them about
as Ari Fleischer continues the briefing,
as we've discussed, the disarmament of Saddam Hussein's regime.
Now, we know, in hindsight, as we all saw on TV last night, we know how the president opened
sirens
this
are
war.
sounding in Baghdad. That would make perfect sense, as evidently U.S. ground units going north from the south Kuwaiti border are making progress. So sirens are sounding in Baghdad, and we'll let you know if it goes beyond that.
Police's recommendations are the best way to win the war and to disarm Saddam Hussein. He relies on their judgment and expertise. He lends his thoughts to it, and the action was taken.
But what was his expectation? I mean, this is a done deal. We all know what it is. It's not a secret. What was his
The
expectation?
President's expectation of all actions military will be to pursue the disarmament of the Iraqi regime. That's what this is about. The reason war has been brought upon us is because Saddam Hussein refused to disarm. This did not have to unfold this way. The president gave Saddam Hussein every opportunity to disarm the way other nations have disarmed when they wanted to disarm, and that meant complying with the United Nations resolutions. Saddam Hussein failed to avail himself of that opportunity, and therefore he brought this upon himself. And the pursuance of this will now be done through military operations, and the president's only objective in making determinations about which military plans are best is what will lead to the disarmament of the regime.
But did the president hope that a strike at the leadership of the Iraqi military and government would in fact disassemble the military and make the operation either end quicker or go easier if he could knock out the leadership?
Well, clearly, there are millions of Iraqis who are yearning to be free. There are many who are in the military and other places of importance in the Iraqi regime who, if they had freedom, would make different decisions. It's the leadership level at the top that has imposed this tyranny on Iraq and has brought the world to the point of the use of force. Clearly, the world would be better off without these leaders in place. This is all part of the conduct of war. Ken?
Just to close the loop on Gene's question, that was his expectation for last night's mission. Was it fulfilled in his view?
As you know, all bomb damage assessment is being reviewed by the Pentagon and appropriate authorities. Larry?
One more question, please. Can you tell us why Rand Mears has resigned his position as the National Security Council's chief of counterterrorism?
He informed the National Security Council that he would leave for personal reasons.
Is his departure connected in any way with his feeling that the beginning of the war against Iraq would undermine the mission?
I've seen no evidence that would support that. He has informed the National Security Council it was for personal reasons. Larry?
Ari, do you read anything into the Iraqi response thus far to the attack? I mean, they've fired a couple of Scuds and apparently set fire to a couple of oil wells.
I think that's a question best addressed to military analysts. I see any large number of them on TV. I think that's not a question that I can answer for you.
But you see, when we quote those analysts, you usually criticize us for not going to the people who know.
Well, in this case, I refer you to the Pentagon. Ken?
Do you have anything new on the timetable for bringing the supplemental up to, or an estimate on just how big it is?
Nothing new since Ed asked the question just a few minutes ago.
Yesterday, Secretary Ridge suggested that there'll be money for Homeland Security in there. Can you give us an idea what kind of figures the White House is working with at this point?
There will indeed be money for Homeland Security in the supplemental appropriation bill that will be sent up to the Congress. The amount of that money will be discussed when the supplemental is sent to the Hill. Dick?
We're going to show you, as the Ari Fleischer briefing goes on here, the first battlefield video coming into us. This is from the 3rd Infantry Division, the so-called tip of the spear, the first units to breach the border from Kuwait north into Iraq. And so while you listen to Ari Fleischer, this is the video that has just come into us.
Australia that are providing direct military assets, personnel, equipment, things like that. And the second question, can this war be considered a success ultimately if Saddam Hussein is not either captured or killed? Because one of the rationales going into it has been the possibility and likelihood that he one day would team up with terrorists and share with them weapons of mass destruction.
Okay.
The Middle East is a very volatile region. If he's able to escape somewhere, a man of his resources with the kind of contacts the U.S. government insists he had, wouldn't he then still be able to make that kind of exchange that the White House has been so afraid of all along?
Okay. 2 points. Interestingly, while again, there are indeed a large number, and this gets to the political issue about is there international support for the actions the United States is taking, which is a terribly important issue. Does the United States have allies in this endeavor as a measure of political support? Stated, expressed opinion from governments around the world. The answer is overwhelmingly yes, representing more than 1 billion people on all continents around the world. In terms of the combat alone equation, and I remind you, you can't have combat if you don't have overflight rights, if you don't have basing rights, etc. So it's really a broad issue. But narrowing it down exactly to the issue of combat, which is only one slice of how to measure the world's involvement. In terms of actual combat operations, boots on the ground, it's interesting because lay out the comparison, in 1991, the United States provided in the mid-70s the percentage of the armed forces in the region itself. In this endeavor, the percentage is a little bit higher, but not much. It's comparable. It's mid-80s. And so what you can see is when the decision is made to engage in combat like this, like in 1991 or here in 2003, the fact of the matter is the United States of America does provide the overwhelming bulk of the support for the operation. That's a reflection about the capabilities, the size of our military. The President is very, very pleased to have the operations of other nations in the world, both in the military sense, in terms of the overflight rights. There are nations that have provided chemical and biological training units. They are small in number, but they're important in terms of the measurement of those countries' commitment to this cause. And so the numbers really are not that far off from what it's been before, but the numbers of the coalition, I think, are large and are growing. And that's important, too, to recognize the coalition of the willing is growing. And I'm not sure I can say that about the opposition in this case. On the second point you ask about if Saddam were to leave the country, would he be able to... the issue is the weapons that Iraq possesses and whether Iraq would pass those weapons off to terrorists. I think it's safe to say that anybody who would leave the nation would not be able to leave with those weapons.
So you're ruling out the possibility...
The risk is that a regime led by people like Saddam Hussein would continue to work to build weapons, which then, because they are in power, they have the covert ability to pass those weapons on to others. That's the purpose of the mission.
I guess my question is, though, if he were to somehow get away, wouldn't there be the possibility, wouldn't there be the fear, certainly within the CIA and the FBI, that he still
that he would carry a nuclear weapon with him?
No, that he
I'm not sure that's...
No. I mean, let's be realistic. The man has a network within his own country. It'll take a while to dismantle that. And wouldn't it be possible, in fact, more than possible, that he could maintain contact with people who had these weapons and that they could somehow be transferred to terrorists?
I think one of the purposes of the disarmament of Saddam Hussein's regime is to dismantle the networks that supported him in the building or in the transfer of those weapons. Mark?
If the United States is at war, and if you assert that the United States has the right to target the Iraqi leader and his inner circle as part of command and control, does that make the President and the White House a legitimate target for Iraqis?
A reporter asked me that question a few weeks ago, and my answer then is my answer now. You can tell anybody who wants to know the answer to that to get their own international lawyer. I won't do it for them.
Can I ask you in general terms? Obviously, we've seen tremendous security around here. Is the President confident in his own safety here?
Absolutely.
Can I ask you one more thing? All right, just in general terms, that's a fear, obviously, that Americans in general have in terms of their own security. We've seen the terror level go up to orange. Is there any thought that now that war has actually begun, that might change sometime in the near future?
That is always a daily determination about whether it goes up or goes down. There's nothing that's been brought to my attention that would indicate it's going to do either of the above. As far as the security and the comfort of the American people and their homes and in their places of business, the President understands that for many people in this nation, this can be a tense time. The President understands that, and he's very sensitive and caring about that. The President is confident that the steps that have been put in place by the Department of Homeland Security, the improvements made to Homeland Security since September 11th, are effective. But there are no guarantees. But the President does believe that one of the most important, effective ways to protect Americans in the homeland is to stop attacks abroad before they can gather on our own shores. And the biggest threat that we worried about in the cases of Saddam Hussein was that if the world allowed him to, if the world sat on the sidelines, Saddam Hussein would indeed one day bring those weapons to our shore to attack our people. This action is taken to protect our people so that day never arrives. Goyle?
Now, within 24 hours of the war, more and more countries are joining the United States against Saddam Hussein, including many from the Arab countries. Now, what is the reaction from the more Muslim countries in the area, and also what role the United Nations will play in this war?
Okay. It's not my role to speak for the other nations in the region, Muslim or otherwise. They are sovereign. They speak for themselves. In terms of the role of the United Nations, I think that's an issue that's broken into two parts. Regrettably, the United Nations was not able to enforce its resolutions requiring Saddam Hussein to disarm. And as a result of the importance of the United Nations and the importance of the resolutions they pass calling for disarmament, force has been used to make certain that those resolutions are meaningful. The President is disappointed that the United Nations Security Council failed to act to keep the peace. Looking ahead toward the future, there is indeed a very important role for the United Nations in the humanitarian efforts and the reconstruction efforts that lie ahead. That is indeed important. The United Nations has fulfilled that role in all corners around the world with ability in the past, and the President will look to them to do that again in the future. Bill?
Ari, you talked about the coalition growing. Have any nations joined since the war began last night, or are we sort of locked in at the number that we had prior to the hostilities commencing?
No, I think it's fair to say the list is growing. I have a list. Let me see what I can do about disseminating the entire list of it, and I'd like to be able to do that.
Follow up. You said that it's no accident that a lot of these countries were recently under tyranny and oppression. They escaped tyranny and oppression. Do you think countries like France have forgotten what it's like to live under tyranny and oppression?
I think countries in Eastern Europe that are so supportive of this effort remember what it was like to have lived under tyranny and oppression, and that's one of the reasons they have been so stalwart and standing shoulder to shoulder on behalf of the cause of freedom. They knew what it was like to live under the thumb of others. They see in the Iraqi people a history that they themselves suffered through recently, and from that is a reason that their support is so strong for this endeavor. The President remembers fondly going to the streets of, going to Romania, for example, and on the streets of Romania were hundreds of thousands of Romanians cheering the United States of America and cheering the message of President Bush when he went there. The President will never forget that.
Harry, I don't have the exact quote in front of me, but the President last night took the opportunity to warn the public that this conflict may take a little bit longer than has been predicted. And I wanted to know what moved him to ask that, since the administration has made no predictions, and how long does he think the public's perception of this conflict will last?
Well, again, the President did think it was important to say to the country that we do not know what the duration of this will be. We do not know how hard it will be, but he wants to prepare the country for the possibility. We hope it will not be the case, but the President wants to prepare the country for the possibility that this may be longer and harder than some have suggested. That's why the President said it.
Well, who has suggested that it will be quick and easy that he was referring to assuage the feelings of the public?
I think there are any number of analysts, again, who have their own opinions and are free to express them. Bob?
Ari, over the last few days, there were several steps leading up to this moment. Obviously, the President was in the Azores. He gave Saddam the 48-hour deadline Monday night. He notified Congress on Tuesday. At what point in this process did the President become convinced that all options short of war had actually been exhausted?
From the Iraqi side,
you know, I think that
we haven't seen an impact.
The process began for the President when the will of the United Nations was not followed by Saddam Hussein, and that played itself out over a considerable period of time. The fact of the matter is that if Saddam Hussein had wanted to disarm, he would have disarmed on the first day the inspectors got to Iraq by showing them and providing them the weapons that he had. Instead, he engaged in a game of hide-and-seek, hiding the weapons that he had, calling the weapons that he has, such as the El Samud 2 missiles, if you remember in that same interview that he carried out with CBS. He denied in that interview that he had weapons that violated the United Nations resolutions prohibiting weapons of ballistic missiles in excess of 150 kilometers. So throughout that period, the President saw that Saddam Hussein was not complying, that Saddam Hussein was continuing to possess the arms that he had. That led, over time, to the period that it's brought us to now. I think that the chances grew slimmer and slimmer in the President's mind that this could be resolved peacefully the more Saddam Hussein defied the United Nations. The final decisions were made, as plans were developed, of course, as you know. I think the final decisions, of course, to use force were made only recently.
Was there a point where the President said, that's it, we have nothing left?
There was really no one sharp demarcation. It was the process of watching Saddam Hussein defy the United Nations. Ron?
Ari, since this issue is going to come up probably repeatedly until Saddam's fate is known,
why do you see questions about that as operational when getting rid of him one way or the other is the president's ultimate goal?
Right. And again, I want to express my sympathy to the White House press corps. I understand your desire to get the operational, even at the most important aspects, answered. Yeah, no, I'm going to give you the answer to that. The fact of the matter is, whether a target is a Secretary Rumsfeld.
As we listen to Ari Fleischer, you can see in the picture to the right of your screen that Baghdad's skyline is once again lighting up with what appears to be anti-aircraft artillery fire. Those would be the bright flashes you see in the sky. That's essentially shrapnel exploding at predetermined altitudes to try and take down American warplanes, which may or may not be in the area. Let's listen for a moment. Larger explosions would suggest ordnance hitting the ground. The lesser explosions would appear to be the anti-aircraft artillery fire coming from various points around Baghdad. Brian Williams is in Kuwait. Brian?
Yeah, Lester, as you mentioned, the louder explosions would indicate bombs dropping, and the anti-aircraft gunners in Baghdad, as we learned 12 years ago, and in various fracases since, have been told to be trigger happy if their radars show Allied planes above. We should bring General Downing into this. General, as we just look at these pictures, what do you make of this? I mean, are they firing at? Is this shadow boxing, or do they have reason to believe that they've painted an aircraft with their radar?
You know, Brian, I don't know. It's hard to say. You know, we're seeing some flashes on a green screen, on an IR screen, but certainly they could be. Firing at our aircraft.
Tom Brokaw and Peter Arnett are having discussion over on the NBC television network. Let's drop in on that and see what Peter can tell us about the situation there. We're searching for the audio of that conversation. To recap, Peter Arnett is reporting for National Geographic Explorer while in Baghdad and NBC News. We have this little piece of information in. A senior U.S. official is telling NBC News that British Tornado bombers were used in last night's attacks on targets outside Baghdad. Also, an airfield in western Iraq has been extensively bombed leading up to tonight by B-1 bombers as part of an attack in the umbrella of the no-fly zone, but we shall see. Without the battle plan, it's tough to know the sequence of events, the order of march here. It's tough to know what aircraft are over Baghdad, what they're firing at. Again, let's give another try at listening in. This will be a conversation between Tom Brokaw and Peter Arnett over on the NBC television network.
Right, as you do that, Peter, I'm going to get an assessment of where some of our expert analysts are here, General Michael Short and Monty Miggs and others. That appears to be an explosion that has occurred in the distance on the horizon. I'm not sure the direction there in Baghdad. It's a sprawling city. About 5 million people live in Baghdad. Quite an elegant city at one time, and portions of it remain that. It's always a surprise to a lot of outsiders. It's the most developed middle class in the Middle East, probably. And the most striking architecture, of course, are all the presidential palaces and the monuments that Saddam Hussein has had erected to himself. Although in recent years he's also erected what he called the mother of all mosques, as he tries to reach out to the faithful in the Middle East and portray himself as a much more religious man. When he appeared this morning on television in Iraq, he referred to the Quran and morning prayers, but he is widely seen, even in that part of the world, as a very secular figure. He uses religion only when it's to his advantage. Okay, let's hear Peter Arnett again.
Again, multiple anti-aircraft bursts sweeping. Now we hear the sounds of aircraft low over the city. Aircraft low over the city. Big explosion near the presidential palace. You will hear those explosions now. It looks somewhere near the information ministry. Explosion. Much smoke in the sky. Much smoke in the sky. It is clear the major attack is beginning on the city. One building seems completely destroyed by a bomb. Again, the smoke rising. And another explosion we're hearing. We are here opposite the presidential palace. This is 5 to 6 miles from the riverfront, at which there are, we are under the impression, 5 to 10 targets. But right now, the one we do see...
All right, as we listen to Peter Arnett reporting directly from a hotel room in Baghdad, we will tell you that at the Pentagon and at the White House, this is the beginning of a campaign of shock and awe, an unparalleled air attack designed to do great damage to the leadership of Iraq, also to have an enormous psychological effect not only on the military but on the people of Iraq, to know that they cannot win this war. Ground troops, if they're not already moving, will be shortly from the south and Kuwait up toward Baghdad. Other troops could be arriving from the north.
You've been listening to network coverage on the NBC television network. We're going to try to isolate Peter Arnett's microphone. We can...
U.S. military officials did tell NBC News that this is the beginning of the shock.
You tell them again they can use the video. Yes, I've told them. I've told them.
Yeah, but NBC, you can use our video. You can use the video now.
We are, Peter. We are. We're taking it up.
Okay.
Conversation between Peter and our technical folks back in the control room in New York. We can use our imagination here with the night scope. We've seen the anti-aircraft, or AAA as it's called. We've also seen and heard aircraft flying low over the city, and obviously, well, that put the lights out. A major explosion there behind the building in the foreground. General Downing, there's a body of water there. I'm trying to figure out which part of downtown this is.
I think this is right here where the river goes by the presidential palace.
Okay.
And of course, Peter's Hotel is across that river, Brian, facing that.
They tell me Peter Arnett is talking once again.
I think that's the information ministry. The area of information ministry. Yeah, but I'm not saying it is.
Well, I was talking about a so-called E-bomb that would get mobilized the electrical grid for Iraq and Baghdad. The question about whether that will be used because the United States, even when it takes ownership of that country, will have to be able to use this power and does not want to do any more damage.
How come my light don't actually get you? No, just a second.
What we're hearing is...
Okay, Tom, for the last
what we're hearing, as you can
minutes,
tell,
calm in the city. There's no anti-aircraft fire we can see, but there were two large explosions within a mile of us. One, a large building near the information ministry. It could be the TV center. We can't quite identify it yet. Another one opposite us in the presidential palace area. I think it may be one of the intelligence department buildings. We are not sure. There was 10 minutes of intense anti-aircraft fire. We heard the sound of low-flying planes, and there was a lot of activity way to the west of us, where there could have been other bombing. But as far as Baghdad is concerned, right downtown, 2 buildings destroyed so far, Tom.
Peter, what about anti-aircraft fire here in Baghdad? They activated as well.
Interestingly enough, no, Tom. We basically saw the anti-aircraft essentially to the west and to the northwest. In terms of the actual center of Baghdad where we are, we did not notice much activity. Now, on the other hand, I just haven't literally seen many anti-aircraft weapons in this area. I presume that we're around. But I must say that in the first Gulf War, there was far greater use of anti-aircraft than we have tonight. It was just this total spectacular display in the morning of January 16, 1991. Much less effort here tonight. Minimal compared to what it was in 1991. Now, whether the Iraqis feel that this has not been the main attack and whether these planes coming in, presumably stealth bombers coming in at great speed, hitting only 2 targets in the city, may not have been enough to trigger the whole array of anti-aircraft weapons here, Tom.
And it is, what, 9:15 there tonight, Peter? That is the time. It's an 8-hour time difference.
It is indeed 9:15 here, Tom.
Right. It's worth pointing out as well that the airport and the airport like to have the anti-aircraft line up, so to speak. Then they know where they are, and they take them out of the scene. I noticed that the holding back or to say we do know that a lot of his passengers were visited in the last 4 years. I'm quite alibi.
Republican Palace has not been hit. The palace has not been hit yet. There was a missile in that direction, like past the hotel there, but it has so far nothing.
What about the information ministry?
Well, that information is
so what we're listening to, as you can tell, is Tom Brokaw's microphone in a studio in New York as it's going out over the network, being listened to by Peter Arnett,
that's by the way,
who's talking to both Tom and his colleagues in a hotel room, and you can also hear another foreign-speaking reporter using the same hotel room. So we'll stay with this. There could very well be another volley by air, and some of this damage you just saw was caused by Tomahawk cruise missiles. There's more anti-aircraft fire now.
The interesting thing about watching this is that they may be doing a situation where they're using their cruise missiles and standard.
Okay, well, right now a lull, continuing lull, so we don't need you yet. Over. Okay, give a yell when you want to come back.
Let me get some water.
The risk, of course, is that we'll hear things like Peter Arnett's request for water, but this is a raw, both audio and video feed out of Baghdad.
Where?
Peter Arnett, of course, one of the on-air icons of the coverage back when CNN was covering this war back in 1991.
Yeah, well, I'll see if I can do that. We just have a position on the east bank of the Tigris River. We are looking at the presidential palace compound. This is a vast area, 5 to 6 miles along the river. We've seen one hit within that compound. To my knowledge, it may well be an intelligence center. Within this compound, the main presidential compound of Saddam Hussein, we believe there are 8 to 10 targets that have been designated in the past as important in terms of command and control. And in the Gulf War, in fact, there were 8 of these buildings were attacked. We have not seen any hits on the actual presidential palace, the site of where we believe the presidential bunker is said to be located. But the bombing attack was relatively brief, several bombs falling. But however, in the distance, in the distance to far to the west, there is a continuing display of anti-aircraft fireworks. We see missiles going into the air, but we can't hear the sounds of bomb explosions, but a continuing activity probably 5 to 10 miles away that we can see in the far distance. Yeah, hello, you're speaking to me? Okay, thank you.
No doubt, this is a quarter of Baghdad. What's that? I thought I heard them saying we're in the Palestine.
I don't know who said it, but yeah, I see those flashes. I know that. If you see anything different.
Yeah. Right, a reminder, it's 9:20 p.m. in Baghdad. It's now about 18 hours after the strike.
Yeah. Okay, I see. Yeah, I see. We have relatively limited vision here. Now there was an explosion we noticed to the southeast. There are also several targets in that area, the international airport, and again, intelligence headquarters, command headquarters. The eruptions of anti-aircraft fire intermittently. We're hearing smoke is still rising from the first building hit, a building that we have not identified. We don't want to identify until we're absolutely sure what that building might be. But smoke rising from there. A second building that was hit seemed to explode, and that particular fire seems to be out. But the first building still emitting much smoke from that building. Otherwise, the city of Baghdad absolutely quiet. Otherwise, no traffic at all on the streets. A few people walking around in front of their houses. Another large explosion in the outskirts of Baghdad, probably to the northwest. A very loud explosion, followed by intermittent anti-aircraft fire. Seems to be another attack coming in. This follows the pattern of the first Gulf War, where about every 10 to 15 minutes in the initial phase, there were waves of missiles or planes hitting the city. 4 or 5 minutes of attack, 10, 15 minutes delay, further attacks, and more delay. However, as I said earlier, the anti-aircraft response from Baghdad much more limited than in the first Gulf War. Much more limited.
It is Ministry of Information.
What?
It is Ministry of
It is?
Are you sure? No, 100%, but it is Ministry.
Are you sure? Yeah, hello, Arnett here. Are you sure? No, you can't.
So just for those of you just joining our coverage, we are listening to a number of things. On the other end is Peter Arnett, who again is in Baghdad on the Tigris River, calling out the locations of what appear to be the buildings that have been hit. It appears this is going to come in volleys. All kinds of reports about what is being used here. Seems to be a few Tomahawk cruise missiles. Seems to, other sources say a lot of aircraft have left from Qatar. A lot of aircraft have left from the decks of the USS Teddy Roosevelt in the Mediterranean. And we'll keep switching back and forth between our camera angles.
I am ready again.
And you're hearing really what is not intended for broadcast, but Peter Arnett knows
Peter
we're
Arnett
listening
back
in.
again. We're trying to identify the first target that is still burning profusely. It is a hit in the very near the information ministry that was rumored to be a major target of the American airstrikes. There were journalists working there relatively recently. We cannot confirm, however, that it is the ministry that has been hit, but there was an enormous explosion, much fire, But in that area, there are several other targets, including the Iraqi television station system, which was a target in the first Gulf War. The Information Ministry was not a target in the second Gulf War, in the first Gulf War. This time around, has been very clear that many international media have been working there, and we were working in the Information Ministry earlier today, but we cannot confirm that that is the target of the first bomb. It is certainly very near that ministry. Beyond that, back to you, Tom.
No, I was just going to say, are you seeing any damage to roadways and bridges? Those were targets in the past, but they're thinking out it's not seeming like there's
Clearly specific buildings. We have seen 2 that have been destroyed. We've heard explosions in 2 or 3 other areas. The presidential palace itself remains intact. One building in the presidential compound has been destroyed. We did hear a major explosion to the south to the southwest of that building. We can't eyeball it here from here, but clearly another one of the command and control structures. Clearly many targets to the western edge of the city, because there was enormous anti-aircraft fire earlier, away in the distance. Beyond that, there are no other targets of the Defense Ministry intact. Communication centers on the east side of the river where we are so far unhit. So you don't have a similar pattern to the first Gulf War. Clearly not at this point, but of course this is just the beginning of what is promises to be, of course, a huge bombing campaign, Tom.
And General Michael Short, who was here with us, how does it work? They lay down the cruise missiles in tunnel one, and then the tactical and how I think cruise missiles again, air launch, sea launch, to take out define the Iraqi air defense system for raising on the front on the scope aspect of the conventional.
Dubai or Al Jazeera TV? Very close. Very close. Al Jazeera or Dubai? We can't say that.
Tom Brokaw's coverage continues in New York. We're listening to Peter Arnett's hot mic in Baghdad. There is a lull. It's the second lull in the attack, and we are going to dip in when we can get a report from Jim McLeshevsky at the Pentagon. General Wayne Downing is here with us.
Massive bombardment of Baghdad in what they would call the shock and awe campaign. That was the original campaign underway, and I guess it could be best described perhaps as shock and pause. It was suggested to us that there may be waves of airstrikes now that are more incremental, aimed at specific leadership targets. As Peter Arnett described the areas being struck in this latest wave of airstrikes from U.S. warplanes and missiles, those are aimed at the Baghdad elite and leadership targets. According to officials, the bombing last night aimed at this bunker that supposedly contained Saddam Hussein and senior members of his regime. That was a very direct message aimed at Saddam Hussein. That was followed up today by messages from both Secretary of Defense Rumsfeld and Ari Fleischer during their briefings here in Washington. What's interesting about those briefings is that they are beamed into Iraq via airborne radio broadcasts through military aircraft, and the message from both of them today was very strong. Essentially, give up while you've got the chance. Take down Saddam Hussein and avoid an all-out war. This is these airstrikes are apparently designed now to reinforce that latest message. Meanwhile, still no indication that despite the artillery barrages being aimed across the border at the 51st Mechanized Unit in southern Iraq, that any of those ground troops have actually begun to move into the country of Iraq. Tom?
So Jim McLeshevsky has tossed it back to Tom Brokaw. In the meantime, let's talk to General Wayne Downing. We'll remain on these pictures, and we won't come off of them in case something happens in the interim. General, it's a gruesome business. We are watching some just fearsome power get unloaded on these buildings. We have a report that in plain English, this is nothing. The big wave is still quite a ways from here, but the precision with which they are planning to hit these targets, I imagine, is better even than the last time you were at this business.
Well, Brian, I think that's exactly correct. Certainly we heard Mike Short earlier on another show tell us that in the last Gulf War, 10% of the weaponry was precision. In this Gulf War, that percentage is exactly reversed. 90% of the munitions are going to be precision, 10% the so-called dumb bombs, which means they're going to be able to hit specific targets, they're going to be able to minimize collateral damage, and they are going to be able to target individual leaders, places of work, residences. And Brian, knowing how we do these kind of things, also, where they go, where they hang out when they're not on duty. And I think the frightening thing, certainly for the Iraqis, is the word that we are hearing is that this is not yet the main attack.
This is the curtain raiser.
What we're seeing right now is a curtain raiser. Now, what is the curtain raiser? The curtain raiser is taking out those elements which can oppose the air attack. So we're looking at here, the term the Air Force uses is the integrated air defense system. Now, what is that? That's the communications means. That's these fiber optic nodes that we have located. These are the centers, the command and control centers. These are the radar centers. And of course, what we're trying to do is break down this integrated system so that all these weapon systems have to shoot at you autonomously. Now, that means they're still lethal and they can still knock down an airplane, and they did during the last Gulf War.
Right.
And I don't think the law averages will tell you that we're going to get through this war without losing something, but it certainly makes it less likely.
The Serbs got a silver bullet shot on a F-117 stealth fighter. There's no greater collection of technology in the air, and they gave it a lead and took it out of the sky. This is
which is a
here's Peter Arnett again.
At the northern end of the presidential compound, just a point of interest. And if you want me to talk about it, I can confirm the information ministry has not been hit. It was an adjoining building to the ministry.
That's, again, Peter Arnett communicating with New York, and we're hearing Tom Brokaw's studio mic in the background. Don't ask me how the electronics work, but that's what we're hearing. Excuse me. And you heard Peter Arnett's reference this fire that the after effect of the bombing campaign, burning at one end of just one of the presidential palaces in Iraq. We heard the aircraft when Peter Arnett referenced them. The first explosions appeared to be caused by cruise missiles. If the aircraft are from the Teddy Roosevelt, then they're making this round trip from the Mediterranean. We fully expect some of the cruise missiles that light up the night there to come from right behind us here in the Persian Gulf. As we look at this fire, there seems to be a lull. Sometimes these lulls can be used to great but cruel psychological advantage. You have to believe that the Pentagon's assurances that they have kept collateral damage to a minimum, reminiscent of the scene in the movie The American President, when the fictional president worries about how many people are working the night shift in a building he's about to destroy with cruise missiles. And Baghdad has been here before, and we saw the scenes of the desolate streets during the day today. They knew this was coming. We'll show you what it looked like just a few minutes ago at the height of this, when we realized what we had coming in on the night scope circuit. That's flak, what we used to call flak, now called AAA anti-aircraft artillery, exploding in the sky. The Iraqis don't have the most sophisticated air defense system in the world. That appeared to be outgoing, a surface-to-air missile, however, and then this really starts to light up. You hear the This is tape of Peter Arnett talking.
You tell them again, they can't use the video. Yes, I've told them.
And that was again tape of what happened earlier. Remember, these night scope cameras really exaggerate sources of heat and light. But the shot of that fire in the high-rise portion of the building can't be exaggerated. So we're in between volleys, apparently. In another development on the battlefield, wire services are reporting the 1st Marine Division has crossed into Iraq. So we're talking about two completely separate components of this war, the air and the ground campaign, and then there are subsets of that. The ground campaign, don't forget, you have the first fast-moving breach units firing as they go, moving at speeds up to 60 miles an hour. Behind them, the units that go more slowly pick up prisoners. There's a vehicle on the move there in the foreground. And then further behind them, the folks who come along, and we saw these trucks at the front lines with loudspeakers saying, "We're from America, we're here to help you." Let's listen to Peter Arnett again.
Well, you know, this is a phenomenon of Baghdad. Even during the heaviest bombing of the first Gulf War, vehicles were driving around. Now, don't forget, a lot of officials, a lot of these cars are probably official cars, maybe militiamen going to posts. You know, this is a party, a country run by a very intensely, repressive regime that has many, activists in it and many enforcers. So a lot of that will be these people. The picture you're looking at, by the way, if you're looking at the fires, that they seem to be in Deputy Prime Minister Tariq Aziz's former office. Now these fires seem to be spreading, so clearly that was an earlier target. I can confirm, Tom, that the Information Ministry was not hit in that initial attack. It was an adjoining building, an adjoining government building whose purpose we don't really know what it's used for. But the Information Ministry still stands, which I'm glad to hear, because I think there are quite a few of the international media still around there, Tom.
I think if you're after we get these former officers here,
You're absolutely right. Of course, Tariq Aziz has moved out of there. He is in another palace building. Well, he's been there, and he's been giving interviews there, and I think you interviewed him there. But that building is yet to be hit, Tom.
Military sources are telling us that the assault that we heard Donald Rumsfeld describe as a force, scope, and scale that has not been seen before has not arrived yet, but in plain English, we'll know it when we see it. And General Downey, who is watching this with me, this is, it's clear that the Bush administration only wants to do this one more time.
I think so, Brian. I mean, they're revisiting this thing once again, and I do not think they're going to hold back. I really don't think that if they get a situation like they had the last time, that this is going to stop them. I think they're going to carry this thing through because they know they've got to take this guy out. Hopefully, you know, it's not going to take a large loss of life for that to happen.
You heard Peter Arnett reference the specific office of Tariq Aziz. He was the subject of so many rumors yesterday. We have a piece of animation. This is from amazing satellite imagery from space imaging. Zooms right in as an aircraft would over downtown Baghdad. This is kind of where we're looking, and it's that portion of the high-rise building that is on fire. We have the ability to pinpoint locations in downtown Baghdad. You see there an emergency vehicle responding to the fire. I don't know how well advised that would be right now between volleys, but something tells me they're acting on orders. As we're in a almost spooky lull there, we've zoomed in using the doubler to twice the strength, and you just see fire all over the place there. All of this a kind of secondary explosion. At the base, and then high up to the right of that high-rise building. Peter Arnett is in a location they believe to be safe and, shall we say, off the beaten path of the American-led air crews. So many aircraft they can bring to bear on this. The B-1s, the B-2s, F-14, 15, 16, two of those carrier-based. F-117, the stealth fighter. B-52 they would not use for close-in air, only as a launching platforms for cruise missiles. There's a report already that U.S. Navy submarine-based cruise missiles have already been used in this conflict today. The Tomahawk cruise missiles that can be launched from the deck of a ship under the wing of a B-52 and from subs anywhere in the waters, anywhere in this region. As we recently found out, spending some time on board the nuclear sub USS Memphis, they can, the submarine business has changed dramatically. They can intercept a cell phone call inland in Iraq. They can be intelligence gathering platforms, and they can also be fearsome cruise missile firing platforms. So the skies, as you see right now, are still over Iraq. From our vantage point here in Kuwait City, we can hear a boat steaming up the Persian Gulf, occasional horn of an oil tanker as they arrive in the harbor, and the stillness there of the skies over Baghdad. General?
Well, Brian, I think what's going on right now is, we're analyzing what went on with the strike last night and the strike so far today. They're doing real-time analysis of all the electronic signatures that they picked up. They're going to figure out what they got, what they think they got, what they didn't do, and then they're going to go back in and they'll be probably giving instructions. It's just like an audible on a football play. A lot of these strike packages coming in now are going to be getting their audibles. They're going to be perhaps changing targets, and they're going to go back in and hit them again.
So they're sitting in Doha. You and I were privy to some of the battle maps and the satellite photos they use to array these target packages. Is it true that the next strike package, I guess it must be already en route?
Absolutely.
And so they can make tweaks to the target package and see what they hit, what they didn't hit, what needs a second strike? Is that
what needs a second strike? That type of thing is going to be going on. And of course, the Iraqis are in a real tough position. I mean, in order to get a decent chance at knocking down one of our aircraft, they've almost got to come up and radiate with some kind of a radar. Of course, that's exactly what we're attuned to. We want them to do that. Perhaps a lot of these low-flying planes that Peter Arnett heard were actually cruise missiles coming in. And again, this gets a reaction. You're trying to stimulate them, get them to do something, and of course, they've done it. So now they're going back, they're taking a look at that and say, who lit up, on what frequencies, where, associate those with different weapon systems and with different systems, then prioritize it from 1 to 10. Okay, these are the top 4 we want to take off. How many other systems, do we have available? Then they'll work down that list. And it's kind of almost like a mathematical formula. It's almost like a logarithm. They'll sit here and they'll work through this thing, and now they are going to systematically take this place down. Now, how long is this going to go on? That is a good question. We may have several of these stimulating strikes to get reaction, to figure out the system, to see what we have, the intelligence community around the world is analyzing this real time, feeding it back in. And then I think when they get to the point where they've gotten this thing broken down and it's safe, then they can bring the more vulnerable aircraft in, and then I suspect that this unprecedented show of air power that the Secretary of Defense has shown us, that's probably going to come on at about that time. So it's going to be interesting to see how many pulses like this we get before we get the main event.
Yeah, look at the moon over Baghdad. That's almost eerie in the night scope. I have this guidance. We're going to roll some of the tape from the height of it. I have this guidance as we watch from Jim Miklaszewski and Pentagon producer Tammy Kupperman, and it says U.S. sources indicate the campaign underway will likely be more incremental than the original concept of shock and awe. That's interesting. The same amount of weapons could ultimately be dropped, however, and the intensity could grow. So that latter part, everyone's saying it is more than likely end up being true. This, I believe, is the picture where it looks like we can pick out either cruise missile tally lights, running lights, or individual aircraft. In one of these, it does appear that one of their surface-to-air missile sites was working. And we see outgoing, followed quickly by incoming. It's all really something. The science of it, the night scope, the exactness of the strikes, the tragedy, the true tragedy of war, however, as American commanders keep repeating, we have no quarrel with the Iraqi people. It's their leader. It's about regime change. It's about weapons of mass destruction. And if so much as one child is lost tonight in this, that will be a tragedy to American commanders, many of whom have children just like them of their own at home. We will stay on these pictures. Brian Williams with you from Kuwait City. I'm joined by General Wayne Downing, and let's bring Rob Morrison into the conversation. He is at CENTCOM headquarters in Doha. Rob, what have you learned down there?
Well, once again, the buzzword here today, Brian, is operational security. Very tight-lipped about the things that are happening right now in the air, on the ground, and at sea for obvious reasons to protect the troops that are out there. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs today saying in the news conference that it would not be appropriate to comment on the preparatory strikes that are going on right now. And I just had a conversation with the military official here about what he thinks is going on here, which is called preparing the battle space. Now, they talk about preparing the battle space, not the battlefield, and he describes that as sort of a three-dimensional game of chess, using all your assets, air, ground, and maritime, with every move affecting the other layer of operations. For instance, you keep the enemy off balance by hitting them with different weapons. Once you're attacking them with cruise missiles, and they're defending themselves against that, you go ahead and hit them with short-range weapons, the kind that might come from the fighter planes that we've been seeing flying over Baghdad. All this being done right now, preparing the battle space for the next phase of an operation, which would be the kinetic phase, which is the actual combat. Brian.
Rob, thank you. Rob Morrison down in Doha. And this note coming from NBC News producer Bob Windrum, senior U.S. official, is telling NBC News there are around 45 leadership and security apparatus targets in Baghdad that will be struck over the course of the campaign. These are the current targets, could be amended, as the general was saying, as new intelligence is derived. We should also point out again, look at the pedestrians there. This vantage point of a highway overpass and a fairly modern-looking office building, cars going by downtown Baghdad, somewhat unbelievable. Very good chance the next group of aircraft, the next cluster of cruise missiles is already on its way, perhaps not far from where these people are moving around. The forces on the ground, and to be honest, here's what's going on. We have a fleet of correspondents, the so-called embeds, embedded in their military units, who are, many of whom are moving. We can't report their locations, obviously. We can report their units, where they started from, but to report anything more would give away operational details and jeopardize some of America's sons and daughters and husbands and wives. So we won't do that, but as we get their reports from while they are en route, we will of course turn them around instantly and air them. As we speak, our reporters and camera crews traveling in tanks, Bradley fighting vehicles, are seeing the ground war and are recording the ground war. And in some cases, we are probably minutes away from hearing from them. We know someone connected with the Marine 1st Expeditionary Unit, which was, I think it's safe to say, we can term it making good time, was saying that there's a method to the speed of their forward progress. They'd like to get as far as they can under cover of darkness before the sun comes up. The U.S. Armed Forces love the expression, "We own the night." And because of technology that, in this case, the other side does not possess to that degree, they tend to own the night. Again, we're in the middle of a lull. If you're just joining us, this is Nightscope picture, the familiar green picture that made its television debut really about 12 years ago of Baghdad. That is also live, real-time picture, a different vantage point of downtown Baghdad. We are between volleys. A large fire is raging out of control in the high-rise portion of the central presidential palace down in the bend. If you're familiar at all with downtown Baghdad, the bend in the Tigris at the center of town, right there. Peter Arnett is reestablishing his communications with us. The fire appears to be headquartered at the former headquarters, I think we'd safely say, of Foreign Minister Tariq Aziz. These amazing graphics are from the firm Space Imaging, and we have put them together with our animations to show you these various locations. If you started from space and moved in to the ground level. We're watching the skies for any flecks of light that might indicate the next incoming package. What is extraordinary about this part of the world right now, and we have been to the front lines in the desert, we have been out in the Gulf on the decks of carriers all over, land, sea, and air resources available to the U.S. commanders, U.S. and British, are absolutely extraordinary. General, it wouldn't hurt to repeat what is probably going on in the Central Command tent right now as we watch some of the earlier video. What's going on? If you're Tommy Franks running this war, what are you doing?
Well, he's probably sitting there, Brian, and he's monitoring the plan. He's got a huge board up there that discusses what's going on. It's time sequenced. He can look at given times for what's going to happen, there in the future. As you said, you know, he is using every dimension that he has there, air, land, and sea. And what they're doing is they're probably tweaking the plan. They're taking a look at some of these strike packages. His air component commander is telling them what kind of changes he's making in them. Not that General Franks is that interested in the details, but he is interested in the effects. And unlike the first Gulf War, when we went into a prolonged air campaign that lasted 30-plus days before we got the ground action, it appears that what we're seeing here is a ground campaign that is about to begin, and is beginning really almost simultaneous with the air. You're also seeing now in this operation an extensive use of the Special Operations Forces, which were really very judiciously used during the last Gulf War by General Schwarzkopf before the ground campaign started. And the reason he did that one of the reasons, is because he did not want to alert Saddam Hussein to that left hook. He didn't want to get him stirred up. He wanted him to continue to look where he was looking, which was down from the Kuwait border into Saudi Arabia, as General Franks, as General Schwarzkopf prepared that great left hook that the 18th Airborne Corps conducted, led by our colleague, my fellow friend, Barry McCaffrey.
Let me interrupt you there, General.
The differences.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Bob Kerr, standing by at the White House, will stay on these pictures and listen to your voice, Bob. What was remarkable, we're here in Kuwait City watching these live night scope pictures, and this started while Ari Fleischer was still briefing, answering questions that at the end of the briefing were on some fairly routine matters. What is being said there now?
Interesting you ask, Brian, because just as this was starting, Ari Fleischer was telling us that there is no further go-ahead needed from President Bush at this point. We were told that this war plan had been approved, and what you're looking at now is just the implementation. Interesting, though, to note that this war plan, which kicked off today in this way, was supposed to do that by calendar. The exception came yesterday when, of course, they had that limited attack to try to take out Saddam Hussein and some of his top leadership there in Iraq. That was a deviation from the war plan. The president did sign off separately on that late yesterday. So what you're looking at now, we're told, is the implementation of the war plan previously agreed to earlier this week, approved by President Bush. Interesting also to note that at the White House today and at the Pentagon, here at the White House, Ari Fleischer was saying that it would still be a welcome event if Saddam Hussein looks at all this and chooses to go into exile.
And we continue to hope that Saddam Hussein will leave Iraq. We continue to hope that Iraqi generals will not follow orders. It is not too late for them to do that. It is very important that the President has said that Iraqi generals and Iraqi troops lay down their arms and not engage in combat. This is not their battle. This is not their war. This is a war to disarm the Iraqi regime from its weapons of mass destruction.
And what I can tell you, Brian, is that we understand that the president is having lunch with the vice president, and we should see the president within the next hour or so as he meets with his entire cabinet here at the White House.
Bob Kerr, thanks. Of course, the location of Saddam Hussein is the X factor in all of this. One rumor our reporters were chasing down was that he had been wounded in last night's call it an ad lib, an audible, a surgical strike that was off the war plan. The intelligence and military aides to the president surrounded him yesterday afternoon and said, "We think we have a pretty good shot." We knew that this was always an option, that war plan or no, if they had an idea where Saddam was at any given time. And it has been so difficult for U.S. intelligence over the years to place his location, to infiltrate the very tight confines of Saddam Hussein's world, so heavy on security, ruled by fear, so heavy on loyalty, multi-layered with lookalikes and any various means of security, including but not limited to taking normal cars around the city of Baghdad, using the city bus system instead of motorcades that satellite photos might be looking for instead. A lot like the rumor was about Fidel Castro years ago, not sleeping in the same place 2 nights in a row, always fearing for his life because of what we've seen tonight, the kind of air campaign that can be unleashed. General Downing, absent a specific location, for the sake of conversation, let's say that we don't have the kind of intelligence the president had yesterday afternoon that Saddam and his top commanders were meeting at one location. I guess this comes down to playing the odds, hitting the buildings and the locations where he is then the most likely to be.
Yeah, that's what they'll do, Brian. And of course, that was a target of opportunity, and I believe they were correct in taking that target. But that doesn't necessarily mean that what we're seeing right now is necessarily directed entirely at those leadership targets.
Right.
These are, I think, probably the integrated air defense system, but they'll come back to it. Whether or not Saddam Hussein was in that building or not last night that got hit, whether or not he was wounded or not, he certainly is going to be skittish, and he certainly is going to be moving around. It's got to affect him psychologically. When you come that close to getting blown up by a bomb, killed, that has an effect on you. I mean, look at Muammar Gaddafi. I mean, we've really heard very little of him since that strike in 1986. So, they will come back and visit us. Now, the other thing we got to think about here, too, Brian, is what we saw in Baghdad there for this, brief 4 or 5 minute period of time. From what we can tell, this is going on around the countryside. In other words, we are not just hitting Baghdad now. Now, because we don't have reporters in some of these other areas,
that's right,
we really don't know what's going on, but we have indications that there are strikes going on around the country.
Well, what we don't have right now is the ability to talk to our folks because their communications are being suppressed by previous agreement with the Pentagon. We have just crossed the top of the hour, 10 o'clock local time in Baghdad, 2 p.m. on the east coast of the United States. You see the first vehicles kind of coming out now. Here's the way the Associated Press is putting it at the top of the hour. Heavy detonations, air raid sirens, and the crackle of anti-aircraft fire thundered through Baghdad late Thursday as the Iraqi capital faced a second night of U.S.-led attacks. This is the Nightscope video from the height of what was just the first volley of what we understand will be many. This is a fearsome unleashing of American air power. Hear the thunderous concussion. A lot of that is the AAA, the anti-aircraft artillery aimed at American and Allied pilots, whose goal is to get in, get out, and drop what they have on the targets that are pre-selected. We have every reason to believe the next volley is already launched and on its way as we speak. We have correspondent Jeannie Ohm standing by at the Pentagon. Lester Holt is at our world headquarters with some of the details on this mission as it has played out so far. And in the center of your screen, Rob Morrison is down at CENTCOM headquarters in Doha. Jeannie, we'll begin with you at the Pentagon.
Brian, as you can imagine, we're getting various different reports coming in here to the Pentagon, as well as different eyewitness accounts, as well as different stories coming from the journalists embedded. But as best as we've been able to piece together, now sources are telling NBC News that what we're really seeing are war plans in flux, if you will, that they're changing it as they go, that instead of the original concept of shock and awe with thousands of cruise missiles and smart bombs, instead they will be taking on an incremental basis. And in fact, that's what you've been reporting, what we've been seeing as well, with some more cruise missiles launched in Iraq. But I also spoke with other military officials here in the building who are saying no, when the major assault does begin, it will be unmistakable. So if you can take those two different accounts, perhaps it's something in the middle. But Secretary Rumsfeld addressed this very issue at his news briefing, saying that despite the well-crafted war plans, things will change the minute war starts. And that's certainly what happened, especially with the fact that there was a target of opportunity last night. That's why this whole timetable, if you will, was stepped up. They were trying to go after senior Iraqi leadership, including Saddam Hussein, but they're still doing battle damage assessment. Now, senior U.S. officials are saying that of the targets struck shortly this afternoon that you've been monitoring, that one included a special security organization run by Saddam Hussein's son, Qusay. They're also telling us that an office run by Saddam Hussein's chief of staff was also hit in this latest round of attacks. And U.S. officials are saying that in total, at this point, they have identified about 45 leadership and security targets. So again, that is the latest at the Pentagon at this point. A lot of different information coming in. Brian?
Jeannie Ohm, thanks. And we have a link up with Neil Connery of the British television news organization ITN, who is with us from Baghdad. Neil, can you hear us? And is it as still as it appears during this this lull between volleys? Neil Connery
opened fire into the night sky. We saw the tracer fire rising up across the Iraqi capital. Then we heard at least 2 explosions, massive explosions. One was about 2 miles to the north of me in what I would call the central target area, if you like. That's where most of the administrative headquarters of the Iraqi leadership are based. There is a building I can see now still on fire, all floors, flames coming out from all floors of that building. That building isn't too far away from the Ministry of Information where journalists work. We were there about 2 hours ago and left for safety reasons. There is also Iraqi television headquarters are in that region as well. But we're trying to establish exactly what type of government building has been struck there.
Neil, is there anything? Can you hear anything on the horizon?
You'll have to forgive me and repeat the question. Sorry, it's a bad line.
No, I understand, Neil. Can you hear anything on the horizon, anything in the vicinity, or is it completely still now?
Completely still. Well, every couple of minutes we see the tracer fire from the anti-aircraft guns lighting up the night sky over Baghdad. Very similar picture to how things were here this morning at 5:30 local time when things got underway. We felt that the rumble of the first bombs. I was lying in my bed and you could feel that rumble basically passing through the brickwork of our hotel. We all jumped up, all the journalists and camera crews here, and started filming that the activity this morning, the airstrikes, which then lasted for about an hour before the all-clear siren sounded across the Iraqi capital. It's been a relatively quiet day here. The streets have been deserted. People just with a sense of dread and fear that talk of this campaign starting and the talk from the Pentagon of this policy of shock and awe. That is what people are dreading tonight and in the nights to come, and I think what we saw in the last hour really is a taste of that intense bombing, the targeting. It seems to me, it's very difficult to say this with any accuracy, but I would say that the precision bombing seems to be targeting these government buildings, or at least areas where I know that there are government buildings. But until we get a chance to get out from our hotels and establish exactly what has been struck and how much damage has been done, I wouldn't want to say that with too much confidence.
Neil, thank you. While you've been talking, we've been watching a live picture, grainy. It's a video phone picture, but nonetheless it is live from the deck of a carrier. I think that was an A6, was it not, taking off from the Constellation, which is at work as part of this air campaign. You see the EA-6 was the aircraft we just saw taking off, and this appears to be an F-18 coming up to the flight line, 2 of them side by side. You see the V-tail there, and they're getting the flashlight of the men and women who work on the deck of the Constellation. They'll approach and be the next to be catapulted off the deck. This is an active flight deck, and this tells us that see the thermal tape markings there on the tail, and we're getting the exaggerated running lights, and there goes an F-18. You see the flames from the afterburners as it is off. Live pictures during a wartime situation from the deck of an aircraft carrier. Quite extraordinary. As grainy as they are, it is also first as the next F-18 comes up to the line. And note the frequency. This is real time. Note the frequency of how fast they're getting these guys off the deck. The men and women who fly these jets for a living, and remember, they've all got to land, and that is a dark stamp in the middle of a rolling sea with just minimal approach beacons and landing lights on a tiny runway. Yes, there is a tail hook and tripwire to slow you down, but it's one of the toughest jobs in the United States military, make no mistake. Neil, we have been told that by our folks, and tell me if this jives with what you know, the high-value targets, at least in the northwest section of Baghdad, Ministry of Defense, the Central Presidential Palace there, the Intelligence Headquarters, the Air Force Headquarters, the Defense Central Computer Center. Is there any way to put a number on how many targets you think have been hit in all?
Well, I think let's take what happened here this morning with the first airstrikes. From where I was, it was clear that most of those took place in the north and northwest of Baghdad, some distance away from where we were. We have asked permission to go to various sites here today. Of course, as you appreciate, journalists working in Iraq operate under certain restrictions, rather.
Yep.
And what we were allowed to do was go on a bus tour of the Iraqi capital today with minders from Iraq's Ministry of Information. But all that did really was just give us a flavour of how the mood was on the streets. We weren't actually taken to any of these sites that were attacked this morning. So it's very difficult for us to say with any accuracy exactly what has been struck, what kind of level of damage has been done. And what capacities may have been knocked out. I mean, in the days to come, obviously, maybe we will get more opportunities to try and establish those facts for you. But what is clear this evening, again, is that the attacks, for the first time, are really coming to the center of Baghdad. This building that I'm looking at now from the balcony I'm standing on, still ablaze, still flames roaring from the floors, all floors of this building. It's, I'd imagine, a 10, 12-story building that I'm looking at. In this central target area, as I call it, where the main administrative center of the Iraqi leadership is. Iraqi television isn't too far away from that site, but I don't think it's actually Iraqi television that's been struck here. I would say that it is another government building that has been hit and that is on fire. There is smoke rising high into the night sky from that blast, and also from another blast to the west of the city from where I'm looking out now. I'm trying to establish exactly what that location is. I've been discussing with some colleagues. There are some Ba'ath Party headquarters out in that direction, but again, it's very difficult to say with any accuracy until we get a chance to get out and see for ourselves, maybe in daylight, what has been done and what damage may have been caused.
Neil Connery, thank you very much for spending time with us, and I know we are between volleys there in Baghdad, and stay in a safe location if you can, because of the indications we're getting out of the Pentagon is you'll know the main attack when you see it, and we haven't seen it yet. Neil Connery reports for the British television news organization ITN, whose work we often air here. We mentioned Rob Morrison is in Doha at CENTCOM headquarters. The whole shooting match down there is run by Tommy Franks. Rob, anything that any information they're letting out would be welcome information at this point.
Indeed it would, as I've told you a few times tonight. Unfortunately for us, it's just tough getting any information, but of course it is certainly understandable. The operational security is at its absolute highest tonight, Brian, with operations of this nature underway. Whichever battle plan might be in effect right now, whether it's the incremental buildup that we've heard about or whether this is simply a prelude to the so-called shock and awe phase, the decisions are being made right here at U.S. Central Command. I got a chance to go inside the Joint Operations Center yesterday and take a look around, and basically what you have are soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines sitting behind computer screens, looking at maps on the wall, headphones on their heads, taking in all the communications and all the intelligence from the field and deciphering that information, filtering it, and then passing it along to General Tommy Franks, who is in his war room with his top military advisors. The people who are in the Joint Operations Center are all high-ranking military officers, all with combat experience. And as we've seen the pictures tonight, as chaotic as war can seem, and as chaotic as war is, it is the exact opposite here at U.S. Central Command, and they do that for a very good good reason. They call it battle rhythm. They try to keep things very calm and very methodical. This has been a 24-hour operation for several weeks now, and they do that on purpose just so they could be ready for whenever the order came and whenever the attack was, the order to attack was given on Iraq. So basically you have people reporting to work the same time every day, getting into a rhythm, a battle rhythm here, going to the gym, going to the chow hall, going to the bed at the same time at night. So they can be sharp, because the sharper they are here, the better protected the men and women out in the field are. Brian?
Rob Morrison down at CENTCOM headquarters in Doha, and the reports from the correspondents embedded in the on-the-road units with the Marines, regular Army, are coming in. They have the reports are coming in of small towns that are seized along the way. Troops that have given up. One group of Iraqis were found laying mines as the Americans approached. An unspecified number of Iraqis have surrendered to a Marine group. To tie all of this together and see where we are right now in the fighting, my colleague Lester Holt back at headquarters.
Brian, thank you. The Kuwaiti news agency is reporting the border town of Qasr has been taken by U.S. troops. Let me refer you quickly to the map. I'll show you where it is. It lies just above, or perhaps even inside, the demilitarized zone that straddles Kuwait and Iraq. This was an area that probably until a few days ago was simply chain link fence. That area, again, that has reportedly been taken by U.S. forces right along the border as they begin their thrust into Iraq. Let's talk now about the explosions we saw in Baghdad just a short time ago. No specific word on the weapons used, but based on the reports and Peter Arnett and others that they heard the sound of low-flying jets, it's a pretty sure bet they were hearing cruise missiles. Those could have been either sea launched, the Tomahawk version, which of course have already been launched in this war off of submarines and ships in the Red Sea and the Persian Gulf. They can fly about 690 miles. They're subsonic, but they fly very low and are generally very accurate. The other weapon that could have been used, another cruise missile, it's the air-launched cruise missile. Comes off the B-52, packs a bigger punch, but it too travels 700 miles. The B-52 never has to cross into enemy territory to strike its target. Now, let me refer you to another map of downtown Baghdad. We're going to show you an area we believe was hit. We don't have specifics of the area, but we had been told areas of northwest Baghdad, in the downtown area, perhaps. Some of the likely targets the U.S. would be looking for here. There is a presidential palace right in this area, and I'm putting that symbol up there. It doesn't necessarily mean it's been hit. There is also the Air Force headquarters in this area. Farther up, there is the Ministry of Defense, a number of government buildings in this area. It is an area, we're told, of the Iraqi elite, the Ba'ath elite, a number of key buildings, and we know that a number of places in this area were targeted during the first Gulf War. Many of the explosions tonight have been heard in that area. So again, we don't have specifics of what was hit. We were told a building, Peter Arnett said a building adjacent to the Ministry of Information was hit. There is a cluster of government buildings there. They're very nondescript. They have numbers on the sides of them. When I was there many years ago, one of them, in fact, had an anti-aircraft artillery battery on top. I can't tell you if that's the case now. Nonetheless, that's the area where many of the explosions have been heard tonight. Brian?
Right? Lester, my apologies. I was getting a piece of business from the control room, trying to confirm our next guest, who is with us from New York, Vice Admiral Dennis McGinn. Admiral McGinn, we were just watching flight operations on the deck of the Constellation. And I'm wondering if you can describe just what it must be like at this tempo in the middle of the night, mixed-use aircraft, and how hard they must be working to keep them all aloft, keep the orders straight, and the packages of aircraft.
I would call them quietly confident, Brian. Certainly there's a great intense focus on the mission at hand, the fact that it is combat. But those ships have been out there for a number of weeks and in some cases months, and they've gotten used to a battle rhythm that has been put against Southern Watch targets for many, many months. I think the The adrenaline is certainly running higher than normal, that said, and especially in the normal course of events as a carrier pilot, taxiing up to the catapult, particularly at night, getting ready for that cat shot loaded with ordnance and fuel, climbing out, rendezvousing with your wingman, and rendezvousing on the tanker, getting a full combat package, and then pressing into enemy country to take care of business.
How does it differ? I guess some pilots would have us believe that, look, we work in the no-fly zone all the time. While the media has lost interest, we are constantly hitting targets in Iraq. But a layperson would say back to them, yeah, but this is different. Is it in fact to them? Is the heart rate any higher?
Absolutely, it is higher because of the stakes of the game, if you will, and I think this is what we're seeing really the end game for this Iraqi regime. A big difference, I think, in these types of operations, Brian, from the Southern Watch is where they are likely going. Southern Watch no-fly zone ended. The northern edge was 33 degrees north latitude, and clearly Baghdad is well above that, and we have strike aircraft going into that area that is more heavily defended. They've had a chance to build up anti-aircraft artillery, surface-to-air missiles, so clearly the territory is a little less familiar than the Southern Watch area, and the enemy defenses are more intense.
How does this work? These packages of targets. We were just here talking with General Downing about how they are amended once they do an assessment of how it goes. How does it work when they're actually en route and they're tweaking where they're going to end up on the target?
For the most part, particularly in the early stages of an air campaign, Brian, you will go to pre-planned targets. These are targets that have been carefully selected based on intelligence and based on their value to the overall campaign objectives of creating shock and awe, dissuading the Iraqi regime. However, as things progress, as opportunities appear, we saw an example of that, a very dramatic one last night, there is the ability, either right before takeoff or actually after takeoff, because of the increased amount of networks and increased communications capability we have, to re-roll or change the targets or the aim points of some of those missions. Not all of them, but a much greater proportion than we ever had before.
And tell us about the various aircraft and their various jobs tonight.
The three key aircraft in terms of striking the enemy are the EA-6B Prowler, electronic jamming aircraft that can take down the Iraqi air defense radars, early warning and fire control radars. They can take down the communications systems of the Iraqi air defense. The next aircraft I would mention is the venerable Tomcat. It is a strike fighter aircraft with a tremendous precision air-to-ground capability. It's crewed by a pilot and a radar intercept officer in the back. And then lastly, the FA-18 Hornet. Two varieties out there. We have our first combat deployment of the Super Hornet off the USS Abraham Lincoln, but the preponderance of the Hornets are flown by Navy and Marine Corps pilots off of the rest of the decks.
Remind me how many carrier battle groups are in this region and what they consist of?
You're probably going to be hearing over the next few hours and days, Brian, the sound of three carrier air wings from the three carrier battle groups in the Persian Gulf. The Constellation, which we had some footage on a little while ago, the Kitty Hawk, and the USS Abraham Lincoln, which has been out in the area for literally months. They left their homes, families, and loved ones on the 20th of July and have been breaking some records for being away from home, but tremendously motivated. In addition to those three carriers in the Persian Gulf, we have two in the Eastern Mediterranean.
As we speak, we're going to take a look at this new videotape. This is the same scene we saw on play out earlier, but this is a view we have not seen. The smoke plume from the one airstrike we witnessed is extraordinary. A lot of this could be from the resulting fires. It could be from secondary explosions on the ground as well. Part of the huge complex of government buildings along the Tigris River there, right in the center of the city of Baghdad. Again, this is the same collection of airstrikes we witnessed live earlier, but it is a different view. As you see, videotape from a different source. There are only a few correspondents hardy enough to remain in Baghdad tonight, and even fewer of them with live television capability. As you know, our own Peter Arnett is one of them, who's there working for National Geographic Explorer and NBC News, and there are just a few others. We spoke to one of them from ITN. Admiral, what's you mentioned the Lincoln, the Abraham Lincoln deployment, and they've gotten some attention for the length of this. What's an average carrier deployment, would you say?
We try to limit the carrier deployments from original departure from home port to arrival to about 6 months. After 9/11, that rule went out the window, and everybody in our Navy that's out there today fully understands that. They've got great support from their families, but it is tough to be away from your nation and from your family and loved ones for that long.
Admiral, thank you very much for being with us. Vice Admiral Dennis McGinn with us as we looked at those extraordinary live pictures from the deck of the Constellation, which is quite literally right out behind us here in the Persian Gulf, conducting air operations, though just too far out from our range for us to hear them. We're joined, of course, in our NBC News headquarters here in Kuwait City by retired four-star General Wayne Downing. And General, this lull, I imagine, has a huge effect on those sitting there. Think of the firefighters who responded to the fire in that high-rise, wondering when the next one's going to come. Can they do their job in the interim?
Firefighters, emergency rescue people, certainly the police, and the other people, Brian, are the people that are manning these air defense weapons. I mean, they can't be happy campers right now because they know these initial strikes are coming in to get them, because they want to suppress those things. So,
and that goes to the heart of loyalty, doesn't it? And picking it apart, picking the administration, the
absolutely.
Leadership of Saddam Hussein apart.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, it truly does. I mean, for people to do their jobs under these kind of conditions, I mean, they've got to believe in what they're fighting in and fighting for. And I would imagine for an Iraqi member of the armed forces, the police here, the emergency services, fire, and the rest of these, very essential services. I mean, I think probably what they're doing is, they're putting the fate of their countrymen certainly above any loyalty that they have to Saddam Hussein, who's been a very, very brutal dictator.
I know it's so important to remember that it isn't all just about Saddam Hussein. It is about the weapons of mass destruction in this country, and the stated goal from the Bush White House is it's about regime change and setting up a more democratic form of government. It's just that he has been made into the world's boogeyman from the rhetoric of the administration, from the cover of Time and Newsweek. He's a figure better known to some school children in this country than some more prominent American politicians. And yet, absent a Mussolini-like moment where it is clear the leader is dead, as it was with Hitler in Germany, Mussolini in World War II, this could have a strangely nebulous ending, at least for a while.
Right. Well, he certainly is a major villain in history, and I think this administration needs to have him or his corpse when this thing is over. I hope he is not buried under one of these structures that's going to take us months to uncover. Certainly an end like Hitler or Mussolini, where you can identify him, you can show that he's gone, I think will be very, very significant. But Brian, I also believe that this regime change, as you correctly point out, is much greater than just Saddam Hussein. He also has a series of thugs who have surrounded him. This is really not the Ba'ath Party. This is really not the Ba'ath Socialist Party. This is really Saddam Hussein and his clan and their allies from the town of Tikrit, where they come from. And they are running this country just like they run those clans. and they have oppressed their fellow countrymen, and it doesn't make any difference what sect you come from, whether you are a Shiite, whether you're a Sunni, whether you're a Christian, or if you're a Kurd. These people have created war crimes against every one of them, and so they cannot be very popular in their country.
You've devoted a lot of your career to going after this guy. By the way, we're getting late reports, two of them. Iraqi radio says no casualties in the attack on the Saddam Hussein family home, but they are confirming U.S. missiles have hit the Baghdad family home of Saddam Hussein. What, in your mind, could Iraq be in the near future, 5 years, 10 years from now?
Well, Iraq is that is an ancient region. You go back to your Bible, and the people that came out of Iraq have been very, very significant figures, certainly throughout history. It has been a center of culture. It has been a center of power. It's also been a center for some extremely cruel people and cruel leaders. The Iraqis that I have met, and I became associated with the Iraqi opposition in 1997, about a year after I retired, where I helped them try to develop some concepts on how they might liberate their country. I met a lot of Iraqis, both expatriates and expatriates living in the United States, and I can tell you these are extremely talented people, well educated. They have a great capability, I think, to build that country up. I know one of the objectives of the administration is they'd like to see Iraq become a model democratic, whatever that democratic is, that's kind of in quotation marks, within this region, which they think would have a significant effect on the other countries within this region. We certainly intend to maintain the territorial integrity of Iraq, and that includes no Kurdistan. So they want to see Iraq put back together. They want to see Iraqis from both inside and outside come together and form a government. And we don't want to get ahead of ourselves here. We've still got a war to fight. We've got a regime to depose. But one of the big stories that we're going to be following on after the military action, is how this country is going to be reconstituted, and that is going to be a significant task. But certainly, when we look at the example of what happened with Germany and Japan, it's certainly something we can do.
There are so many elements of the attack ongoing, and the attack, we should say, that is planned, in the pipeline, rolling out, that we don't yet know about. For an update on where this stands here tonight thus far, let's go back to headquarters. My colleague Lester Holt. Lester.
And Brian, thank you. As people are tuning in, let's bring you up to speed. Coalition forces have been bombing Baghdad. Eyewitnesses say cruise missiles have hit the city. We're hearing explosions in and around Baghdad. These are the latest pictures, videotape we have in. Air raid sirens have went off earlier in a warning of things to come. The ground war has also begun. Coalition forces launching an attack on Iraqi troops. Reports that the 1st Marine Division has crossed the Kuwaiti border into Iraq. Also reports British forces are engaged in ground operations, and there has been a report of a very small town along the border that's now been seized, taken by U.S. forces. We want to remind you, we recap the latest headlines on the Iraq crisis for you every 15 minutes. At the top of the hour, at 15 after, 30 after, and 45 after the hour as events warrant, right here on MSNBC. Brian?
Lester, thanks. And available to us now for the first time in our coverage this evening, my colleague, NBC News correspondent Mike Taibbi, along the Jordanian-Iraq border. Mike, what kind of activity has been going on along there?
Well, Brian, the stories here are really twofold. There's a refugee situation. They expect to have tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of refugees who may pour out to the west across the border into Jordan. The other story has to do with what, if anything, special forces are doing or have been doing to try to protect Jordan. They're supposed to be in a defensive role, or to try to do any scud hunting or searching for other potential weapons positions inside the western desert of Iraq. We don't know the answer to either one of those things. And I don't know, Brian, are you still hearing me right now?
Yes, I am.
All right, Brian, because the audio is funny. As you know, the technical issues here are always kind of unusual. We can tell you that there was one fact that we were able to confirm this morning. That is an early casualty in this conflict. It happened this morning in that first very surgical stretch of bombing. Here was about 6 o'clock in the morning local time. The Jordanian driver of a fuel truck was refueling at a fuel stop, a well-known fuel stop between Baghdad and the Jordan border called Post 160. When one of those surgical strikes hit that fuel stop, we were told, and there are unconfirmed reports, that several were killed, but this driver himself was one of those who we have confirmed has been killed. We don't know in this latest round of bombing that everybody has been watching in Baghdad whether there have been any other strikes to the west. We've heard no reports of that whatsoever. In terms of the refugee situation, there are 2 camps here, one specifically dedicated to Iraqi refugees. There are no refugees there. There were not as of last light today. The other camp, which is for third country nationals, had about 4 or 5 busloads of people who are not Iraqis living in Iraq who wanted to leave because of the bombing having begun and needed to be processed or sheltered for 1 or 2 nights before they went on to their home countries. About 100, 150 people. We spoke to a number of them, a number of mothers and children, some people who had matching sets of luggage, who just left the country, left Iraq, and a number of students, maybe 60 or 70 students. One of them said, look, this is going to be the big war. This is the final war over there. My parents are pushing me to leave Iraq, and that's what he did. Tomorrow, of course, with this latest round of bombing, we expect the numbers to be much bigger at that third country national camp, and for the camp that's dedicated to Iraqi refugees to be extremely active. The NGOs, those non-government agencies who are readying those camps, are prepared to receive them. Weather's been tough, a lot of wind, but they're ready to receive them. Brian?
Mike, I don't know if you heard at the Pentagon briefing today, Donald Rumsfeld urged refugees, would-be refugees, to stay in Iraq and not seek the services, in effect, of other nations. It's never the first thing planned in a military operation by definition, but a lot of officials have gone out of their way to assure us that they are thinking ahead. They're lining up food, lining up shelter. They realize it may be the other shoe here.
I think, Brian, if you're still talking to me, the audio is intermittent here. That's exactly the case. That's right. And this has been a very difficult crisis to sort of plan for. I know a number of people who work for NGOs, and they come to a situation like this that's developing, and they file SITREP, situation reports, with their home offices. Here's what we need. Here's what we're going to have to ask our donors for. Here's what we need in resources, in shelter kits, and all that sort of thing to be delivered by a certain date to be ready. Nobody could file any SITREPs. They didn't know what numbers to expect, and they didn't know what the funding situation was going to be, or frankly, what policy was going to be from agencies like the UNHCR and local governments. So it's been a really difficult crisis, if it's in fact an evolving crisis, for that world, the humanitarian aid world, to prepare for.
Mike Taibbi on the border between Iraq and Jordan, and our apologies for the communication difficulty and the combined maddeningly long satellite delays these days because of the pressure for satellite time, the overwhelming number of requests for it, and the narrow bandwidth, I'm told. We are continuing to watch these nightscope pictures of Baghdad while parts of that city burn after this first rather devastating volley, a combination, we're told, of Tomahawk cruise missiles and airstrikes from a number of different aircraft. One of our defense analysts continues to underscore that the targeting we've seen, the places we've seen hit so far, have to do with Saddam Hussein's leadership inner circle. Quite specifically, in the city at large, he points out the lights are still on, and the water is still running. And this is one aspect of this we haven't touched on as much. General Wayne Downing is with us. General, this was supposed to be the attack that was different, much more surgical. If we heard that word once, we heard it 100 times. You heard it proffered a few weeks ago. We were going to flatten the city of Iraq and the city of Baghdad, but this is not supposed to be the end game here, is it? For one thing, to restore a government, you need the infrastructure, bridges, roads, hospital buildings, that kind of thing.
That's exactly right, Brian. I mean, they do not want to flatten the country. They don't want to flatten Baghdad. That's the last thing they want to do. They want to take out what they want to take out, when they want to take out it, take this out. And of course now they've got the precision weapons to do this with. They've got the tools in order to do this job. So I think this is what we're going to see. I don't agree completely with Bill that it's all about leadership now. I think we are hitting the leadership, but we've also got to take out these other things that are going to be enablers for the rest of this air campaign to take place, and then not only the air campaign, the rest of the ground campaign. There's a lot of things going on here, a lot of obvious things, and there's also a lot of things that aren't so obvious. I am sure that we have made contacts with the opposition groups inside. I think both our special operations forces, our CIA special activities people have been doing this. There's a lot of things moving around that country right now because we'd like to see much of this country fall. We'd like to see this regime fall with as little damage to the Iraqi people. I truly believe that, and certainly to this infrastructure. The point about the water still running, the electricity is still on, that is remarkable, because the last time, that was the first thing that we took out. I mean, we took out all the generators. When we got in, for example, to Kuwait City, which was occupied here by the Iraqis, there was no electricity, and every single generator, you could go to it and see that, just like that hardened aircraft shelter that we saw the other day, every one of them had one of these 1,000, 2,000 pound bomb puncture holes in it, and we hit it in order to turn that out. We don't want to do that this time in Iraq, and I don't believe we are going to do this.
Rob Morrison is down at CENTCOM headquarters in Doha. And Rob, 2 points. Number one, we're told that if we get a briefing from Tommy Franks, obviously it'll be quite a moment. First time we've heard from him as a commander of this. Well, Rob, let's hold, and we're going to dip in on NBC News coverage with Pete Williams, who has a development on all of this vis-a-vis the Al-Qaeda terrorist group. Pete?
In planning further terror attacks against the United States. Now, according to a nationwide law enforcement bulletin just out today to the nation's police departments, he's identified as Adnan G. El Shukri Juma, age 27, thought to be from Yemen and possibly Guyana. But law enforcement authorities fear he is, in essence, another Mohammed Atta. Atta, you'll recall, is the man that officials believe was the top planner of the September 11th attacks on New York and Washington. Now, this law enforcement bulletin that has gone out today to the nation's police says that the U.S. has information indicating that he may be involved in an Al-Qaeda terror activity or terror activities and may pose an imminent threat to U.S. interests or persons worldwide. That is, both against targets here in the U.S. or American targets overseas. Now, the bulletin says there is no specific threat attributed to him, but they believe he's very much a key planner, and they're learning more and more about this man as the days go by, and have just recently discovered how important he may be. For example, he is thought to be a trained pilot, and in fact one of his Arabic nicknames is Jafar the Pilot. U.S. authorities believe he was in the United States after September 11th, after the 9/11 attacks, and they don't know where he is. He could be here, he could be anywhere in the world, and they're hoping that they'll get cooperation from law enforcement authorities worldwide in trying to find him. But they put a very high priority on finding this man, El Shukri Juma, because he is a potentially key figure, they say, in any further plans to attack the U.S., and they say this information has been verified by captured Al-Qaeda operatives who've been interrogated by the U.S., Tom.
Pete, let me ask you a couple of follow-up questions. How do they think he got in here in the first place?
They think he got in, well, he tried to come in legally. Now, whether he actually did so legally or not, they don't know, but he travels with a multiple number of passports from Canada, from Guyana, from Trinidad, from Saudi Arabia. He has a long list of aliases, and they say he is a very good English speaker. One investigator told me today that he speaks English with no Arabic accent whatsoever, and so he is adept at passing as someone from various parts of the world. So it's believed that he traveled into the U.S. Whether he did so legally or not, I don't know, because I don't know if he was using a legal passport and his real name at the time.
And Pete, he sounds pretty radioactive to me. Have they not been aware of him before?
Williams breaking this story today about this Adnan El-Shukar Juma, and before we can talk to Pete, I'd remind our audience that General Wayne Downing's last job was as the President's chief counselor on terrorism. And General, this character was familiar to you. Tell us about him.
Well, certainly not him as an individual, but he with that capability. I think we've made a lot of changes in our air system, as you well know, inside the United States. It's very tight overseas. But I'll tell you an area that we were concerned about, and I think we're still concerned about, and this is charter aircraft and private aircraft. I mean, we have almost 500,000 private airplanes and pilots in the United States. We have a lot of charter aircraft out there. While we've got great controls over the commercial airliners, the freight haulers, one of the concerns is how do you control this guy at some small airport? You know, we've got thousands of airports around the United States.
Most of them you can walk right on.
You can walk right on. You have to present a license in order to rent an aircraft. But if you've got that pilot's log and you've got good forged credentials, you can theoretically get your hands on an airplane. And so that is something we are all concerned with. Now, this is not going to be a 757, but certainly you could rent a twin-engine commercial aircraft, and you could put a pretty good load on that. And so we are concerned about that, and that is one of the vulnerabilities that I think the Homeland Security people are trying to fill right now. So this is I think it's very significant that they've aired this threat. I would imagine that Khalid Sheikh Mohammed could well be the source of this information, and that's why they're taking it so seriously.
We now have Pete Williams available to talk to us, who just broke this story, as we saw on the NBC television network with Tom Brokaw. And Pete, what I missed at the top was the connection, the meaning of breaking this story today. Is this connected with the war?
No, I don't think it is, Brian. It is more connected with getting out the word as soon as agents discovered how important this man is. Now, let me go through this with you. He is thought to be a top al-Qaeda operative in the U.S. who could be involved in planning further attacks against the U.S., and the information we have comes from a nationwide law enforcement bulletin that's just been sent out today to the nation's law enforcement departments. You know, law enforcement, it's called a BOLO, be on the lookout. And the man is identified as Adnan El-Shukar Juma. He is 27 years old. He is thought to be from Yemen or possibly Guyana in Africa. But law enforcement authorities fear that he is, in essence, another Mohammed Atta, the man who was thought to be the top planner of the 9/11 attacks. Now, this bulletin says that the U.S. has information indicating that he may be involved in al-Qaeda terror activities and may pose an imminent threat to U.S. interests or persons worldwide. And they are equally concerned about attacks not only in the United States, but against Americans or American interests overseas. They don't know where he is, and they don't know whether these attacks could be here or could be overseas. Now, having said that, this bulletin, this BOLO bulletin, says there is no specific threat attributed to him. It's not like they've uncovered some specific plan. It's rather they've discovered that he is a key al-Qaeda planner. Now, the FBI is learning more about this man and has just recently discovered how important he may be. For example, Brian, he is thought to be a trained pilot. And as a matter of fact, one of his Arabic nicknames is Jafar, the pilot. U.S. authorities believe he was in the United States after September 11th, but they don't know where he is now. They don't know how long he was here, how he got here, how he left, they're not sure, or even whether he left. But they put a very high priority on finding him because al-Shukri Juma is thought to be a pivotal figure in any further plans to attack the U.S., and investigators tell us this information has been verified by talking to captured al-Qaeda operatives who have been interrogated by the U.S.
Pete Williams, thank you for that from our Washington newsroom, breaking this story this evening. And all of this, the specter of domestic terrorism has been part of the national conversation in the days leading up to this widely expected war in Iraq. The anti-war factions in the United States had feared very acutely that this would perhaps set off a round of domestic terrorism. My colleague Lester Holt is at headquarters with an expert in this area to delve into this a bit further. Lester?
Thank you. I'm joined with Steve Emerson, who has been working the phones even as we speak. And Stephen, I just went on the FBI's website. He's not on that list that they've been carrying of most wanted terrorists. Have you heard this name before?
I've seen his picture before. His name has actually been cited in a previous FBI warning issued earlier this year, referencing a Pakistani who they thought came into the United States before 9/11. One of his nom de guerres or aliases was Jafar al-Tayyar, also one of the same aliases used by this person that Pete Williams has just pointed out may be in the United States. I've just learned that a similar sounding person with the same name and the same date of birth owns property in Florida. And was at least in the United States in the year 2002. So the information may be quite recent in terms of identifying him as either being part of some type of plot or in terms of the intelligence that said there's a need to put out this information now.
But what about his relative rank in the al-Qaeda structure? Has he been previously known to be as influential or as big a fish as he seems to be now?
From what I understand, he was known as the pilot. He was known with a group of people that were connected to some radical Somalis and Yemenis, and that he was not, however, in the senior leadership of al-Qaeda, but certainly somebody who had been trained as a pilot and could have been, let's say, a mid-level operative recruited by al-Qaeda to carry out an operation. Look, Mohammed Atta and the others before 9/11 were not on our radar screen either. They would have been considered not even mid-level operatives for al-Qaeda before 9/11.
And while there have been arrests and detentions in this country post-September 11th, we haven't heard about that many big known al-Qaeda operatives in this country, have we?
No, in fact, if he is in this country and could be found, that would be the biggest arrest, obviously, since 9/11 of anybody connected to al-Qaeda in the United States. There may have been some surveillance, and I'm not sure. The government obviously wants to be careful about what it releases, but clearly there are roots in the United States. The only question is, and as Pete reported, is whether he's here right now. Obviously, for reasons that I'm not aware of, the FBI decided we got to make it public right now. We got to make sure the public starts looking for this man's picture so that maybe they can ID him and we can pick him up very quickly.
There has been this sense of optimism among federal law enforcement officials in recent weeks that they may have turned the corner in the battle against al-Qaeda and its ability to wage large attacks. Does this change that perception if, in fact, this man is who they believe he is and if he is in this country?
Well, certainly this is a guy that you would consider as a clone of the 9/11 conspirators in terms of somebody who may not have had a track record, who was under the radar screen, but who certainly hung around with the bad guys and you know, basically became a made member of al-Qaeda because he went to jihad camps, as we think he did. He then became a pilot. Question is he actively working for them now? He may have severed his relationship. On the other hand, for various reasons, and I believe it must be recent U.S. intelligence just acquired by the CIA, relayed to the FBI, suggesting that this guy is still connected to al-Qaeda and may be planning or involved in some type of plot against the United States.
And the word is be on the lookout. Adan Shukrajiyama is the man that the FBI now looking for. Steve Emerson, thanks for coming in, sharing your expertise. Let's go back now to Brian in Kuwait City. Brian?
Gentlemen, thanks. And back here in the war effort, we keep looking at the by now familiar night scope view of downtown Baghdad, in addition to the other camera location we have locked down. We saw a fast and furious air and Tomahawk missile attack. It has been some time now, however. We had a narration of it and the live reporting from Peter Arnett when it was happening. But there has been a lull. There has been a pause. We have seen pedestrians in some cases returning to the streets of Baghdad. This is what it was like at its very height. This again, videotape from earlier. We got plenty of guidance at the time saying, in effect, this is nothing. This is now a live picture, and I think that sound we are hearing, the sound we are hearing has died away. This is a live picture, and there seems to be, again, no activity. A lull in the skies over Baghdad. A car driving through the picture now. Nothing going on. Well, aircraft perhaps. Strobe light for a strobe light from a passing vehicle.
Is that beautiful? We've got to do 60 seconds here. We are down to 15.
Now we've got the next strike packages coming in. I think they're trying to assess what they found out. You know, all the time they were running those first strikes, they were collecting electronic information. Certainly we've got satellites overhead that have a lot of different capabilities. They're probably sorting a lot of that out. They're taking that strike package in now. They may be making some adjustments to what's going on, and then we've just got to wait for the next one to come in. You know, I've spent a lot of time in my life, especially as a general officer, sitting in what we call the JOC, the Joint Operations Center, waiting for these things to unfold. Now, the only difference between then and now is before I knew the schedule. I knew what it was. I knew the events, and so I knew when I could get up and take a break, go out, get some fresh air, get a cup of coffee. This time around, I don't know the schedule. Tommy Franks knows it, and he certainly is following it. So what we're doing right now is waiting to see what else goes on. The other thing that I would throw out there for us all to remember is, this campaign, this air campaign, is just not taking place in Baghdad. There's a lot of other targets that are being hit, also surgically, around the country. And then, of course, while all that's going on, we've got our Army, we've got our Marines, we've got our Special Operations people, and we've got our CIA operatives that are also very, very active at this time. So there's a lot of parts going on that we can't see, but they're all part of this plan.
I would only say welcome to our world. We also want to let our viewers know that the General mentioned the parts of this conflict that are going on where cameras can't see it. In many cases, our correspondents can see it, are recording it, but their work is being held, embargoed, until it no longer would represent a threat, a risk to any operational secrets, which of course can involve endangering American lives. We have many of our NBC News correspondents so-called embedded in military units, which there is every reason to think, hope, and believe right now are moving, and in some cases moving very quickly, from south to north, in most cases from the Kuwait border, north through Iraq. Chief among them, the tip of the spear, as they like to call it, the 3rd ID, the 3rd Infantry Division, the huge mechanized and infantry division that is marching its way on up through and hopes to be in the central part of the country before too long. But again, along with the Marines and every other division, all Americans, and we noted there will be a resolution in the Senate before too long supporting the troops, supporting the effort. We have a word from the President at a cabinet meeting. We're coming up on a White House pool feed. We're all going to be seeing this at the same time, and that evidently is a few seconds away, coming up from Washington. Here we go.
our strategies to make the world more peaceful, to make our country more secure, to make the lives of our citizens as healthy and as prosperous as possible. We heard from Secretary Rumsfeld, who briefed us on the early stages of the war. There's no question we've set the finest of our citizens into harm's way. They perform with great skill and great bravery. We thank them. We thank their loved ones. We appreciate their sacrifice. Word from Secretary Powell, who briefed us on the ever-growing coalition of the willing, nations who support our deep desire for peace and freedom. Over 40 nations now support our efforts. We are grateful for their determination. We appreciate their vision, and we welcome their support. As well, we discussed the need to make sure we have plans in place to encourage economic vitality and growth. We will continue to push for a Medicare system that is compassionate for our seniors. We care deeply about the fact that some children in our society can't read. We want the best of education for every citizen in America. This cabinet is confident about the future of our country. We're confident we can achieve our objectives. I'm grateful for their service to their country. Thank you all.
Thank you.
President not taking any questions. An acute difference between this White House and the last one. A president who found it impossible to say no to reporters' questions versus a president who, when he says thank you all, means it. And he may be taking a little license when he calls this the ever-growing coalition of the willing, over 40 nations strong. The truth is this is a largely American and, to a lesser extent, British-led effort here. This is nowhere near the coalition of nations that was put together and mounted the first Gulf War under leadership of President George H.W. Bush. Many nations making symbolic efforts to contribute what they can to this effort, but the United States has some diplomatic repair work to do around the world as a result of this war that was just launched really in earnest by ground and by air today. 3 p.m. on the East Coast. We're going to throw to our headquarters and Lester Holt for the developments thus far. We'll see you back here in Kuwait City in just a little bit.
And Brian, thank you very much. And as we come on the air from MSNBC World Headquarters, we're getting another report of sirens sounding in Baghdad right now. Whether that heralds another round of U.S. cruise missile or airstrikes, unclear at this hour. We'll keep our eye on this picture as we continue our coverage. We're also, as we look at the very latest from the region, we're getting a bit more information about the first round of strikes that we saw last night, our time, in that hunt for senior leadership. We're now being told by a senior U.S. official it was a private home that was struck, and apparently they traced senior leadership there via electronic eavesdropping. It gave them a fix at what they thought was a meeting of senior Republican Guard, intelligence, and Ba'ath Party officials, including the belief that Saddam Hussein and his son Qusay were there. Now, the other headlines we're following at this hour as we sweep the 3 o'clock Eastern hour. The Iraqi capital, a target again. Cruise missiles hit the city just a few hours ago. Anti-aircraft fire lit up the night sky. A lull right now, as we say, though, sirens sounding there. Smoke continues to pour from several buildings. U.S. military officials say the strike is not the beginning of a massive aerial bombardment. They say that will come later. We'll know it when we see it. This round of bombing may be over for now. Again, the all-clear signal had sounded. Now, again, we're hearing sirens. So continue to train your eye on the picture to your right. And a push into Iraq from the south. The 3rd Infantry Division in northern Kuwait opening fire on Iraqi troops a couple of hours ago, then moving across the border under the cover of their own artillery fire. Reports U.S. troops have already seized the small Iraqi border town of Qasr, and some Iraqi troops are surrendering, an unspecified number. We want to remind you that we recap the latest headlines on the Iraq crisis every 15 minutes, at the top of the hour, at 15 minutes after, 30 after, and 45 minutes after the hour right here on MSNBC, but often, more often than that, because of the fast-moving developments we've got. Dana Lewis is among our correspondents in the field right now with troops here who are thrusting into Iraq. Dana, what can you tell us?
Well, I mean, a lot of what we can tell you now, because night has fallen, comes from our ears and not our eyes. Of course, these soldiers like to fight at night. They have amazing night vision equipment, and that's what they're out doing tonight. But we could earlier hear the heavy thunder of artillery not very far from us in some of those heavy earlier exchanges with artillery with Iraqi forces. We are told by soldiers here that there were 155 millimeter, the big guns, firing into southern Iraq. Just a few minutes ago, we could hear some Apache attack helicopters. They are likely Apaches at this hour, moving out. They were the first to fire some of the shots in the first Gulf War. They may be in action tonight as they move into Iraq and may go after some of those radar sites that are necessary in order to clear the area for the air assets to work their best. Back to you.
Dana, can you tell us if there was any return fire during the artillery barrages?
We've heard conflicting reports on that, but when we asked here at this base, we were told that there were some exchanges. So I believe that there was some artillery fire this way. Earlier, when we were in these bunkers, when we were told to go in here this afternoon around 5 o'clock, we are now told that that is not because of incoming missiles, but that is because of multiple rocket launchers fired by U.S. forces into southern Iraq. But we are not, at that time, we do not believe that any missiles were fired back. But indeed, we think, given the information that we have here, that the artillery exchanges that we heard earlier tonight, they were indeed exchanges, both incoming and outgoing.
And the word we get is those initial strikes yesterday, it would have been early Thursday, your time in Baghdad, were sort of ahead of schedule. What's happening on the ground now? Can you report, is this based on a previous timetable?
You're talking about the incoming Scuds?
Well, actually talking about the artillery barrage and no, I'm talking about the move into Iraq by U.S. ground forces.
I believe, based on what we had been told, and I can't go into any detail of that because it involves mission planning, and you know how delicate that is at this stage. But I believe, given the timetable that we were told about a day or two, that is indeed very early. I don't want to go into specifics, but indeed, as to how many days it was early, but it was a matter of days early.
And I understand you're under some obviously necessary restrictions. What can you tell me? What are you seeing and hearing around you right now?
You know, U.S. forces on this base in a very high state of alert. They really do fear and underscore over and over again that they are worried that they are left here while some forces are moving across the border tonight, the 101st Airborne, which will likely move later because they deal in urban assault, so they will become big players when a stranglehold is put on the city of Baghdad, and when infantry has to go in there, it will be these soldiers from the 101st Airborne. But in the meantime, they're sitting back here tonight, and they are worried about infiltrations, and they are worried about more missile attacks. So we are seeing heavy security patrols moving out tonight, more barbed wire strung across this base in the last 12 hours than I've ever seen anywhere. Lots of patrols. We go in and out of our section here, and we have to give passwords as we move across different areas of the base and know those passwords in order to come back. So a lot of security and fears of infiltrations by Iraqis who may try to detonate fuel depots or try to go after some of the equipment on the ground here.
And do the soldiers themselves have any sense of the big picture? Do they know what's going on in Baghdad and farther across the line from where you are?
There's sort of two levels to that answer. The infantrymen who are here and just out on the base don't have a very good idea what's going on. In fact, we have a television monitor as part of our satellite uplink, and they come around and they try to watch that and ask us what's going on. But across the base, there is a tactical command center very high-tech. Intelligence officers in there are linked into the bigger network, and they have every bit of information as this battle moves forward, because they will be key in that battle. So they are watching things develop, and the 101st Airborne, which will get in the big Black Hawk helicopters and move to different points during this battle, are very much in a stage of alert and flux. The battle plan very flexible, because while they have an initial movement into Iraq, which I can't really go into detail about, they may be called upon to put out so-called fires. If 3rd Infantry, as they're moving into Iraq, suddenly have thousands of POWs that are giving themselves up, they don't want to be slowed down by that, and they're going to need other infantrymen to try and go in and deal with those prisoners so that the advance and the attack can continue, and also refugees on the road. That's been something else that's been discussed in battle planning. So we could see the 101st Airborne that is moving out on a certain schedule have that schedule suddenly flipped upside down, and they are prepared for that.
All right, Dana Lewis. Dana, thank you very much. We should point out Dana is attached or embedded, if you will, with the 101st Airborne Division in Kuwait. We want to go to Don Teague, one of our other correspondents in Kuwait right now. Don, what can you tell us?
Well, good evening, Lester. You know, you and I were here at the same time together in January and February, and we had these discussions, if you'll remember, about the sort of what-ifs and the worst-case scenarios about Kuwait City when this war kicked off, and a lot of the fears was that Saddam Hussein may try to send some sort of missile this way, and it appears that some of those fears were realized today. The U.S. military confirming that at least 2 ballistic missiles called Arbil 100s were sent this way, fortunately intercepted by Patriot missiles, but it made for a very tense day here today. At least half a dozen times the air raid sirens went off. One time late this afternoon, in fact, it was the last alert we had here. The siren that went off was the specific chemical weapons warning siren, which, as you can imagine, put a fright in everyone here. But the good news here, as far as Kuwait City is concerned, it's been at least 5 hours since any of those sorts of warning. The gas masks are still at hand, but they haven't been on in quite a while, and I can tell you we're all happy about that. Lester?
And Don, I can recall witnessing the many drills they had there for Scud attacks and other sorts of attacks. What was the reaction on the streets? Did it appear to be a population prepared for this eventuality?
Well, I started noticing about 36 hours ago, really shortly after the president's deadline, that this place sort of became a ghost town as far as the streets were concerned. And by noon today, almost magically before the first missile attack, it seems that everyone sensed that something was coming, because there was really no one out there. So when those sirens went off, there was no one to watch as far as any sort of panic or reaction, because people were already buttoned up in their homes.
All right, Don Teague. Don, thank you very much for the update from Kuwait City. We want to tell you about the attacks we witnessed a little over an hour ago today. We're now learning that British forces also joined in that attack. Some of the Tomahawks being fired from a pair of British submarines, as well as 2 U.S. submarines and 1 American surface ship. It was roughly an hour, perhaps an hour and a half ago, when the Baghdad sky lit up again with anti-aircraft artillery, the sound of low-flying planes. Apparently, those were the Tomahawks. Peter Arnett, who reports for National Geographic Explorer and MSNBC, was watching and narrating. Keep in mind, what you're about to hear is a tape from earlier. Here's Peter Arnett as he described the attack.
There's no anti-aircraft fire we can see, but there were 2 large explosions within a mile of us. One, a large building near the information ministry. It could be the TV center. We can't quite identify it yet. Another one opposite us in the presidential palace area. I think it may be one of the intelligence department buildings. We are not sure. There was 10 minutes of intense anti-aircraft fire. We heard the sound of low-flying planes, and there was a lot of activity way to the west of us, where there could have been other bombing. But as far as Baghdad is concerned, right downtown, 2 buildings destroyed so far. We basically saw the anti-aircraft essentially to the west and to the northwest. In terms of the actual center of Baghdad where we are, we did not notice much activity. Now, on the other hand, I just haven't literally seen many anti-aircraft weapons in this area. I presume that we're around. But I must say that in the first Gulf War, there was far greater use of anti-aircraft than we have tonight. It was just this total spectacular display in the morning of January 16, 1991. Much less effort here tonight. Minimal compared to what it was in 1991. Now, whether the Iraqis feel that this has not been the main attack, and whether these planes coming in, presumably stealth bombers coming in at great speed, hitting only 2 targets in the city, may not have been enough to trigger the whole array of anti-aircraft weapons here.
That was Peter Arnett again earlier describing what he was seeing as Baghdad fell under attack. It was around 9, a little after 9 o'clock their time when that attack occurred. We reported about 10 minutes ago there were the sound of sirens again in Baghdad. We've seen nothing else. We are keeping our eye on the picture of the right of your screen for any of that telltale AAA anti-aircraft artillery fire. Essentially, those are timed explosions to explode at a certain altitude to try and trap enemy planes, catch them in the sky. It's unclear whether these are being optically aimed, in other words, basically shooting for a point in the sky, or if they are radar guided, which would be much more deadly if in fact there are U.S. airplanes as opposed to just Tomahawk missiles involved. Colonel Ken Allard, a retired U.S. Army and an MSNBC military analyst, joins us right now. If you can talk just a bit more about those explosions we see in the sky, anti-aircraft artillery.
Yeah, you know, the thing that is always interesting to me about that is the fact that we never really have entirely understood whether the Iraqis were shooting these things, you know, with a guidance system. You mentioned the radar, which is basically something which we've had since World War II. Or they were simply firing blind at this stuff, simply trying to put up what amounts to, you know, a lead umbrella of slugs going up in the air.
But by the time you hear a jet noise, it's generally past you. So if you're honing in on sound, it's not going to work for you.
Okay. And that's one of the things they've tried, simply because of the fact that the stealth bomber, of course, does not have a radar cross-section that can be adequately tracked. The other problem they've had with their radar-guided weapons is that once they turn the radar on, it simply invites what the United States calls a harm shooter, a high-speed anti-radiation missile that simply tracks on that beam and rides it directly back to the source. So the answer has been to simply put up, you know, a large array of these things, to simply fire blind. They do it with the rounds set to go off at different altitudes, and it simply is trying to shoot blind to get that silver golden bullet that might knock down one of those aircraft.
Ken, likely at some point we will see pictures of damage in Baghdad, and I have to think at least some of it will have come from that falling anti-aircraft artillery fire. What goes up
absolutely
comes down.
You know, it's sort of the downside of that kind of an approach, but the Iraqis are not famed for their regard for their civilian populace. So it makes sense to them to go ahead and put up this kind of a barrage on the hope that they get lucky, knock down a U.S. fighter, and you know, oh, by the way, there may also be some collateral damage to you know, the neighborhoods, because again, not only, you know, does it go up and come down, but it follows a parabolic trajectory. So where you shoot it from has a direct relationship to where it comes down.
Take me through the strategy of what we're seeing. We understand that Thursday morning, last night's attack was based on a target of opportunity. They thought they had the leadership in a meeting. What's going on today? We've heard of the shock and awe. Instead, we've seen some rather intense explosions, and then they stop. And presumably we'll see more at some point.
You know, it's interesting that, you know, defense officials have told us that, well, you know, it's coming, but it hasn't happened yet. And I think that what we may be seeing here, and it's an interesting sort of tactical departure, Lester, if we've had a rolling start to the ground campaign, which has been the phrase they've been using here of late, we may be seeing very much the same kind of thing in the air campaign, and for a number of reasons. The Turks have only just now granted overflight rights. They still have not granted our right yet to use the Turkish bases, the same ones we've been using, you know, for the peacekeeping missions, but we cannot use them to prosecute this war. So I think it's going to be very interesting to watch that aspect of the development, but I think that this has been a good deal less than defense officials have told us would be the case here, but it's also equally clear that they have an enormous punch that at least for the moment they're holding back.
Is some of this perhaps an acknowledgement to the Iraqi people, to the leadership, that we can turn this off anytime we want, or we can turn it up? Is there in some way the U.S. saying, come clean, stop, we'll stop?
I think they are going very directly, you know, at Iraq's top leadership in both its military and its political senses. I think what they're actually trying to do is they are at the tactical level encouraging units and unit commanders to defect, to surrender. What they're encouraging the political leaders at the top to do is to either defect or to turn against Saddam Hussein. I think they have calculated the fact that the main center of gravity here, to use the military term for that, is indeed the political leadership at the top. It is very narrowly based. It is really not popularly supported, and it's not so much. In the U.S. military, we're organized like a team. In the Iraqi military, they're organized much more like a conspiracy, all the way, at the top. And so I think the strategy is here to simply attack that in the most direct way they possibly can, at the same time that they're bringing pressure in the form of a ground invasion.
Let's see if we can get a bit more insight on that as we continue to look at Baghdad at night. It's about 17 minutes after 11 o'clock at night there. That one round of attacks we saw about 2 hours ago. Jeannie Ohm is at the Pentagon right now. Jeannie, what is the military saying about what follows?
I think, Lester, the very key thing to keep in mind is this is what General Richard Myers said today in the briefing, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He said intelligence and armed forces flexibility will be the key to victory, and that's really what we're seeing. It really began last night based on CIA intelligence, very good intelligence. They believed Iraqi senior leadership were in one location. That's why we saw those 40 cruise missiles, those Tomahawk cruise missiles fired, as well as those bunker busters dropped. And so that's really what they're indicating. Secretary Rumsfeld even said this wasn't going to be the first attack on Iraqi leadership. They're going to be flexible, and that they will take other opportunities when they present themselves. So whether or not have they modified the shock and awe campaign, we are getting conflicting accounts. Some sources are telling us that it will be in increments now, what we're seeing, as opposed to this amazing bombardment. But at the same time, even Secretary Rumsfeld was saying that it will be unlike anything anyone has ever seen before. We even got a briefing earlier this week saying there would be thousands of bombs, many more than used in 1991, a lot more smart bombs used, and thousands of missiles as well. And just to follow up on a little bit more information we were getting on that second round of air attacks, if you will, in Baghdad, they did, according to a senior U.S. official, target a special security organization run by Saddam Hussein's son Qusay, as well as an office run by Saddam's chief of staff, and apparently they were hit badly in the second round of bombing. And so far, senior officials are telling us they have identified tentatively 45 leadership targets, but of course that could change in the coming days. Lester?
Jeannie, there are the families of about 250,000 troops who want to know how their fathers and sons and brothers and daughters are doing right now. Are there any word on American casualties from the Pentagon?
At this point, no, but keep in mind, Lester, this is something very interesting to keep in mind. The Pentagon, we all have to know, for the first time has embedded more than 500 journalists. On the one hand, that is a tremendous bonus in that we're getting real-time information, real-time footage. At the same time, defense officials are not going to be ready to comment on each little tidbit, each little nugget of information that comes in. In fact, General Myers said we are not going to talk about this until the full-scale operation begins. So what you're going to be seeing now will be more preparatory strikes, perhaps, more prepping of the battlefield. Some will be very visible that you can't help but notice. Other things they're not going to comment, so they're not really presenting an overall picture right now. Has the ground war begun? Is this the major assault? So basically, we are relying on the various journalists that are positioned throughout the theater with the different forces. But again, I can tell you, according to officials here, they have not gotten any reports of any American casualties or injuries at this point.
All right, Jeannie Ohm, thank you very much from the Pentagon. We're joined now by the man who ran the last war against Iraq, the Desert Storm. General Norman Schwarzkopf is with us. General, good afternoon. Thanks for joining us.
Afternoon.
Is this war plan fluid by design, in your view?
Oh, I definitely think so. Obviously, the air campaign plan has several phases, and they've executed phase one, but there are obviously going to be more to come. At the same time, they're launching the ground attack, which I find very interesting, that they can do the two of them simultaneously and support the ground attack. At the same time, they're going after downtown Baghdad.
Would that be a difficult challenge in your view?
No, there's plenty of forces available. I just think that there are different missions. During Desert Storm, our job was to eject the Iraqis completely out of Kuwait, and we had to go about it in such a way that we made it untenable for them to be there. Down in the ground campaign, the 3rd Infantry has taken off, and they're attacking and they're moving through there, and their job is to get to Baghdad as soon as they can, and they bypassing troops and that sort of thing. So I think they're two entirely different missions, but we have plenty of support capabilities for both of them simultaneously.
General, the word we're getting from at least one U.S. official is that it was electronic intelligence eavesdropping that allowed them to hone in on a private house where they believe Saddam Hussein and other leaders were meeting late Wednesday, early Thursday morning. Would you say in general that U.S. intelligence is better this time around with regard to what's happening among the leadership?
I'd say there's no question about that. Particularly the amount of information that's coming from Baghdad and from Iraq. During the Gulf War, we got a lot of information from Kuwait, of course, which was occupied, but the phone lines were sometimes reestablished, and more than that, we had other ways of communicating with the resistance and that sort of thing. I find it very interesting that the lights haven't gone off in Baghdad, and one of the reasons could be that we want to keep the telephone lines open.
And that was going to lead to my next question about the fact that this is a country that the U.S. wants to get back on its feet very quickly post-Saddam Hussein. Does that limit the targets? Are they going to be fewer of the kind of targets that you hit, telephone exchanges and utilities and the like?
Not necessarily fewer. I think that they're going to be very strategically selective in what they hit and what they leave in place. And remember, we continue to bomb for 39 days. But our job was to completely and totally isolate the troops in the field from any support from anywhere. And that's not necessarily going to be a requirement in this case.
And is the aim here to not only isolate the leadership, but also try and keep, to the best you can, have the support of the Iraqi public?
Yeah, definitely. We want to limit civilian casualties as far as possible. During the Gulf War, again, during Desert Storm, we knew primarily where the civilian areas were living in downtown Baghdad, and we tried every way we possibly could to avoid them. Obviously, we didn't always succeed, but we certainly tried to do that. And in this case, however, they're talking about leaving a nation intact that can come back on its own feet very, very quickly, and that's an entirely different mission, really, when you get right down to it.
General, lend your expertise, if you will, as to what happens between these airstrikes. We saw one about 2 hours ago. There will be likely others to follow. Is there a constant reassessment as to where you are, what you struck, what you need to strike?
Yeah, there's a tasking order that the Air Force puts together for every single one of its missions, and they issue it on a 24-hour basis to all of their people. It tells them what planes are going to go where, what they're going to be going after. When they come back home, there's another report where they try and figure out what exactly happened. There'll be reconnaissance aircraft that try and take a look at the ground to see how much they accomplished of the mission they set out to undertake. So there's a constant reevaluation going on of the air attack.
General, we're just getting word Al Jazeera is reporting air raid sirens are now going on in Mosul, which I believe is in the north. What is the significance of Mosul?
Well, once again, you see they're shifting from one set of targets to another set of targets. They obviously have a rationale for going into that area. They're probably looking for again, telecommunication sites and that sort of thing. One of the reasons why you don't want to shut down all the telecommunication sites is because then you can't use them for your own information purposes.
Would you have liked to have led a war in a case where, like this, in a case where you couldn't bring your armored units in from the north, or even combat planes in from the north?
Well, yes and no. Okay. Obviously, you want to have as many forces to bear on the enemy as you possibly can get, and it would be great if we had the north coming in, particularly since Tikrit is north of Baghdad and could be a target for somebody attacking from the north and coming down. It's great when your enemy has to look in two different directions, and therefore they have to split their forces and focus on fighting two battles simultaneously. And supporting two battles, really more critical simultaneously.
And I want to draw folks' attention to that picture. What may look like artillery flashes, I believe, is a strobe from a vehicle going by. But we'll keep a close eye on it. General, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Continue, please.
Yeah, but as I say, it's not absolutely necessary that you have an attack from the north in order to accomplish what they're going to accomplish. It may take a little bit longer, and it would be nice to have, but it's not absolute necessity.
General Norman Schwarzkopf, always good to talk to you. Thank you for joining us and offering your insight this afternoon.
You're welcome.
Bob Kerr is our correspondent at the White House right now, where the president made brief remarks at the outset of a cabinet meeting. Bob, what can you tell us about the president?
Lester, brief remarks indeed, and the president did not want to answer any questions. Still, it was a chance for us to see him on camera and a chance for him to meet personally with his key administration officials, those of whom who are not necessarily national security related. The cabinet got a briefing from Defense Secretary Rumsfeld here in the West Wing, and also from Secretary of State Powell, and then the president had this to say to reporters.
This cabinet is confident about the future of our country. We're confident we can achieve our objectives. I'm grateful for their service to their country.
Now, we are told here that the president is making some phone calls still to foreign leaders around the world. Reaction from many key foreign leaders has not been positive at all today. Been some very negative comments. Still, we're told that the president understands their views, won't be deterred, intends to press on with this war effort. Another thing I want to tell you about is something we hear not only here but also at the Pentagon, which is a plea again to the people of Iraq, to the military officers in Iraq, for Saddam Hussein as well, still to go into exile and avoid an all-out war, which has just now only begun. We heard a little bit of this from Ari Fleischer a short time ago.
We continue to hope that Saddam Hussein will leave Iraq. We continue to hope that Iraqi generals will not follow orders. It is not too late for them to do that. It is very important that the president has said that Iraqi generals and Iraqi troops lay down their arms and not engage in combat. This is not their battle. This is not their war. This is a war to disarm the Iraqi regime from its weapons of mass destruction.
Now, we do ask here at the White House, and we don't get an answer in terms of bomb damage assessment, exactly what has been accomplished so far. Also about that Saddam Hussein appearance on videotape last night. What we're being told here at the White House, though, Lester, is that they will react to events, but they're not going to report on them. That kind of information will have to come from the Pentagon and from other places. Lester?
NBC's Bob Kerr at the White House for us this afternoon. Bob, thank you very much. We're nearing the bottom of the hour. It's almost 3:30 here on the East Coast. It's 11:30 at night in Baghdad. Here are the latest headlines. The Iraqi capital has been targeted again. Cruise missiles hit the city about 2 hours ago. Anti-aircraft fire lit up the night sky. There is a lull in the bombing now. Smoke continues to pour from several buildings that were struck. U.S. military officials say the strike is not the beginning of the massive aerial bombardment. They say that will come later. This round of bombing may be over for now. The all-clear signal again sounded in Baghdad. And a push into Iraq from the south. The 3rd Infantry Division in northern Kuwait began their push by opening fire on Iraqi troops with heavy artillery and rocket launchers. That was several hours ago. Then they began their move across the border. There are already reports U.S. troops have seized the Iraqi border town of Qasr. And some Iraqi troops are surrendering, an unspecified number. I want to remind you that we recap the latest headlines of the Iraq crisis every 15 minutes at the top of the hour, 15 after on the half hour, and 45 minutes after the hour right here on MSNBC. Among the many places they are nervously watching the events in Iraq, of course, is Israel. Israel struck many times 12 years ago during the Gulf War. Charles Sabine is our correspondent in Tel Aviv to bring us a story from there right now. Charles?
Hi, Lester. Well, darkness, as you see, fallen here in Israel. That's significant for citizens here in the last Gulf War. All but one of the 39 Scud missiles that were fired on this country came at night. And after what has happened in Kuwait today, there is a much heightened apprehension that this could be the next target. Far fewer people on the streets here during the day, and most of those carrying the cardboard boxes that contain their gas masks and atropine injectors. Now the streets are largely empty as people watch events unfold in Baghdad. The question many of them are asking themselves is that given it now does appear that Saddam can launch at least some missiles, can he reach here with Scuds? And if so, will he use them on coalition forces or, as he did in 1991, fire on this country, trying to draw it into the conflict and gamble on gaining Arab support that way? If he does choose that option, he's probably aware that the Israeli Prime Minister Ariel Sharon today said that if Israel is attacked, quote, she does know how to defend herself. Well, so far though, no signs of these sirens that would indicate the detection of Scud missiles heading this way from western Iraq. If they are launched, they take 6.5 minutes to reach this Mediterranean coast. That's how long people here will have to reach a shelter or a sealed room. Lester?
Charles Sabine in Tel Aviv for us. Charles, thanks very much. We want to go to Paul Nasser. He's a NBC News producer with one of the units near the border. Paul, what can you tell us?
Lester, I am with the 3rd Infantry Division here in Kuwait, and the scene right now is one of eerie silence and quiet. The unit that I'm with has been ordered to get some rest, much needed rest before any push northwards. And but this was a very different scene 3.5 hours ago, when the skies above us just lit up and we heard round after round of howitzers and surface-to-surface missiles being fired from the region that we were in. In addition to that, 3.5 hours ago, we saw a series of cruise missiles making their shore but steady way northwards. And but since that time, things have quietened down, and the unit that I've been with, like I said, has been ordered to get some rest here in Kuwait.
And Paul, I understand you're under severe restrictions as to telling us where you are, but can you tell us, are you in Iraq now?
No, I am in Kuwait, but very close to the border.
These rockets and artillery barrages that were launched from the 3rd Infantry Division, were they? Was there any counterfire from the Iraqi side?
There was none as far as we can tell. Earlier in the afternoon today, we heard a few thuds of surface-to-air or surface-to-surface missiles that were launched from our side, the U.S. troops. Immediately, about 5 to 10 minutes after that, there was a warning of a possible chemical attack, at which point all the unit that I was with was ordered to go up from 0 to MOP 4, which is full protective chemical, biological and nuclear protection gear that had to be donned on. And so these soldiers were dressed in complete chemical gear. They were ordered to put their gas masks on. They were ordered to put their overboots on, as well as their gloves. And they stayed in that condition for something like 10-15 minutes before they got the all clear. Tonight, I will tell you that everybody here is on MOP 1, which is essentially that they're wearing the chemical and biological top and trousers, but their gas masks are not donned. Rather, they're at their side as they should be throughout this conflict.
Paul, we've been watching the 3rd Infantry now for weeks and even months, preparing and sometimes likening it to preparing for the big game. It's not a game, it's deadly serious business. How has the mood changed among those soldiers now that this is the real deal?
Apologies, Lester, you're going to have to repeat the question.
The question is, has the mood changed? Have you been able to perceive a change in the mood of the soldiers now that they are actually engaged in combat?
What I will tell you is that these men, the 3rd Infantry Division, have been here the longest out of all the troops that are in Kuwait. They've been here, many of them, 6 months, and in those 6 months they've been training time and time again. So this is one of the best trained units in the army right now. And many here realize that the only way that they will eventually get to leave this area and go back home would only be after this military activity kicks in, and the way home, if you want, their ticket home is via Baghdad. So when it became palpable that military activity was getting closer, you could sense that. A certain buzz of activity amongst those men, just because they were keen on getting the job that they've been training to do for so long, to get that job done so that they can go home ultimately.
And Paul, I'm thinking with each time there is an attack or potential attack that they have to get into this full kit or the full chem bio gear, does that slow down what they can do?
I will tell you that when we had the supposed threat this morning, this afternoon, the way that these guys went about, you could see us journalists fumbling about and trying to get all this clothing on. These guys were very methodical. There was absolutely no panic. They were working. They put their clothes on. They turned around and made sure that their colleagues had their chem suits on properly, that their masks were working properly. And this is a professional team that has been training for 6 months, and this is a team that is at its peak of its training and its capabilities right now.
All right, Paul Nasir, I guess the order was for that unit to get some rest. We'll let you get some rest. Thank you for joining us on the phone, Paul, with the 3rd Infantry Division, apparently hugging very close right now somewhere along the Iraqi border, and those troops have been told to get some rest. I want to tell you very briefly, Baghdad is giving its version of what has occurred during the U.S.-led attacks, reporting that they believe the U.S. fired 72 cruise missiles, saying 5 soldiers were wounded. 4 were killed. That is the official statement coming out of Baghdad. A lot of eyes in this war effort now are turning to the north, the country of Turkey. It has been on and off again as to whether Turkey would help the U.S. and to what extent. Hoda Kotb is at Incirlik, outside Incirlik Air Base now in Turkey, to give us the latest on what part of the war effort may or may not be taking place there. Hoda?
Lester, Parliament did give the okay for the United States to use Turkish airspace, but not the air base behind me, which is very important. The base has 500 and some odd fighter planes at the ready, waiting. They've been patrolling the no-fly zone since 1991, but the United States did not get the permission to use that. They only got the permission to use the airspace. They also wanted to bring in 62,000 ground troops, which they have been unable to do. So now, the way the attack looks like it'll happen is there are 2 aircraft carriers off the coast of Turkey in the Mediterranean Sea, the USS Harry Truman, the USS Theodore Roosevelt. It will be launched from there, but again, those planes can't even refuel on the Incirlik Air Base. They have to go back to the aircraft carrier. Another way this assault may happen is they may parachute some people in, some troops into northern Iraq, seize some airstrips, and work a northern attack from there. Again, this would be a very scaled-down version, but it is what the Turkish parliament decided to give. And because they gave such a limited version, the United States took that big fat aid package off the table, that between $15 and $30 billion aid package. They took that away. Now, if the Turks reconsider and decide in the coming days to allow ground troops or the use of the air base, the U.S. may change its mind. Lester, back to you.
And Hoda, what's been the informal reaction you've seen so far in Turkey to the U.S.-led attack?
Well, as you know, the Turks are very much against this altogether. They've done some polls here. 90% of Turks are against any kind of attack. And once the attack started, the sense was they knew it was coming. They were waiting for it to come. But as a whole, this nation seems to be very much against it. And you can see just how the parliament's been reacting. They were so slow in allowing the U.S. any kind of leeway. And that is a reflection of, what a democracy in this region has to deal with. Lester, back to you.
All right, Hoda Kotb in Turkey outside Incirlik Air Base, a base that was so integral in their patrols of the no-fly zone, but right now sort of in limbo as the U.S. wrestles with this issue of only having access to Turkish airspace for a northern front. We had told you earlier there was a report that sirens had sounded in Mosul. That is in the north. We have heard nothing further from there. That if there were attacks there, chances are that would be a cruise missile attack. But we'll have to wait and see. You're looking at the right side of your screen right now at the skyline of Baghdad, and you've by now perhaps become accustomed to seeing it green. This is a night scope camera that doesn't require any light, and all seems to be calm right now. It's about 20 minutes before midnight in Baghdad. It's been about 2.5 hours since the last bombardment. It was short-lived, though rather heavy. We saw huge explosions along that riverfront there and lots of anti-aircraft artillery, though, as Peter Arnett with MSNBC and National Geographic Explorer was reporting, did not seem to be as heavy a AAA fire as he encountered during the first Gulf War 12 years ago. The initial indications this was again a cruise missile attack, and it hit in an area that is home to a lot of the Iraqi elite, a lot of key government buildings, a presidential palace. Unclear, though, what the exact targets were that were hit. The Pentagon has led us to believe that that certainly was not the big, awe-inspiring bombardment that has been predicted, that we'll know it when we see it. and we continue to keep our eye on this picture from Baghdad right now. And clearly there are no sleepless nights to be had there as they clearly await more U.S. attacks. What you're not seeing is what may be still going on in the south of Iraq. We talked to Paul Nasser a moment ago, Dana Lewis, all of them reporting troops now in their battle positions. This is the real thing that they have trained so hard for. Our attention has been on them only in the last several months, but U.S. troops have been rotating in and out of that Kuwaiti desert for a lot of years right now. They're quite familiar with the territory. U.S. pilots have been flying over that southern no-fly zone. They, too, are very familiar with the territory as they prepare to push north. Joined again by Colonel Ken Allard, MSNBC analyst, retired U.S. Army. Would you expect we'll see another strike before the night is out?
I wouldn't be surprised. It's getting on a little bit, but I would not be surprised at all, simply because they appear to be keeping the pressure on.
Is the fact that this has caught all of us by surprise, and we were expecting this one gigantic explosion, I got to think that catches the Iraqis by surprise as well, and they're playing even a more serious guessing game than we certainly are.
Well, Lester, I think what the game is here is this is something which is not aimed at the whole of Iraq. It is aimed very, very directly at the only center of gravity up there that matters, which is the leadership cabal of Saddam Hussein. And for the very first time since we began this so long ago, we are seeing very direct pressure being applied directly to that regime. You got to understand that it is organized, as I said a moment ago, not like a team, but like a conspiracy. And what we have now begun to be about the business of is putting the very most direct pressure you can on that regime at the same time that we're hitting them hard. They've now got to start to worry about where they sleep. Again, they've now got to start to worry about where they go. At the same time we're doing that, we're also starting this campaign from the south.
But I can't help think that for all the time the U.S. has had to prepare for this, all the time that it's been in the news and in the United Nations and all that, the Iraqis have had the same amount of time.
Yep.
And they certainly have learned some lessons over the last 12 years.
Absolutely. Look, you know, there are a couple things that you share with the enemy, okay? You share the weather, you share the information domain, and you also share that key component of time. The question is always how much and what use do you put that to? And in this particular case, the military options that Saddam Hussein has are not terribly great. There's no way in the world his ground forces will be able to stand up to ours, particularly with the amount of air power that we're able to throw at them. And I think his whole challenge on this thing from the beginning has been simply to try and do whatever he can to slow us down and to wait for world opinion to catch up, to force some sort of solution short of the removal of his regime.
I want you to go back to your Army training. We saw the 3rd Infantry Division, as Paul was describing on the telephone, launching these multiple rocket launchers today, launching this artillery from these howitzer mobile artillery units. Is that just traditional doctrine? Before you move forward, you pepper the battlefield in front of you?
Well, you basically shoot it where you think the enemy is. This will encourage him either to give up, run away, or die, depending on what his proclivities are. All of which is something that you absolutely do before the onset of a movement. Remember we were talking yesterday about those same units also in the DMZ there between Kuwait and Iraq, and how they had allegedly come under some sort of threat from either Iraqi artillery, anything like that. So what did you do? You simply went out and eliminated the threat. And that's exactly what's being done prior to any kind of a breakout from any sort of cantonment area, which is where they've been in that demilitarized zone. One of the things you do is simply make sure that there's nobody that's left alive out there that can interfere with you. You got American troops that are on the line, you take care of them.
Ken Allard, thanks very much. We're at the quarter hour, so let's bring you up to speed. If you're just tuning in, here are the latest headlines. The Iraqi capital was targeted again today. About 2.5 hours ago, cruise missiles hit the city. Anti-aircraft fire lit up the city. There is a lull in the bombing right now. It's about 1:45 to midnight, and there are reports still smoke coming from some of the buildings that were hit. U.S. military officials say, yeah, we know we've told you about this awe-inspiring attack. This isn't it. More will come later. We don't know when, and certainly the Iraqis don't know when, but all clear for now in Baghdad. Those sirens were heard within the last hour. Also, a push into Iraq from the south. As I mentioned a moment ago, the 3rd Infantry Division in northern Kuwait opened up on the battlefield ahead of them with their multiple rocket launcher systems, their artillery, going after Iraqi troops a few hours ago to facilitate their move across the border into Iraq. And we've gotten reports in the last couple of hours U.S. troops have already seized the Iraqi border town of Qasr, and some Iraqi troops are said to be surrendering. We want to remind you, we recap the latest headlines of the Iraq crisis every 15 minutes at the top of the hour, quarter after, on the half hour, and 45 minutes after the hour right here on MSNBC. We want to go now to northern Iraq. NBC correspondent Fred Francis has been there for several weeks right now. What is the latest, and are you seeing any signs of war from that part of Iraq?
Well, we're about 170 miles north of Baghdad, Lester, and about 30 miles from the Iraqi front lines. Earlier today, after the attack on Baghdad, there was some retreating on the Iraqi front lines. They fired some mortar rounds across into Iraqi Kurdistan. There was some shooting at some of the checkpoints. Then they shut down the checkpoints because thousands and thousands of people were fleeing from north central Iraq into the north here. Tonight in Iraqi Kurdistan, you basically have 4 million people that are either in their homes or well into the mountains, and that is expected. One thing Kurds know about, and that's war and suffering, and they know to get away from this one, but there has been no fighting here yet, and that is according to plan. You cannot begin an offensive on Baghdad and at the same time push airborne troops into northern Iraq. The shock and the shock and awe of this is not going to come for another day and a half as those tanks race to Baghdad. One of the things I wanted to report to you tonight is the fact that the Iraqi General Command really doesn't have much of an idea what's going on, because all those cruise missiles that were sent last night and the bombing today, one of the most important targets hit was the Taji Regional Defense Center 10 miles north of Baghdad. That Taji Defense Center was where the fiber optic communication system, the one node for Baghdad. They hit several other of those fiber optic communications centers, the one in particular near Basra, and this is a Chinese fiber optic system that was put in over the last couple of years. The Baghdad government had great confidence in it, and as this lead up over the last 4 or 5 weeks, the United States and the British warplanes have been attacking various sites. They have left the fiber optic system alone until last night. So now there's nothing, absolutely nothing the Iraqis can do to use their air defense system. Also, the United States forces have bombed several airfields in the western part of Iraq, one airfield in particular, H3, almost 200 miles from Baghdad, but these are to be staging airfields in the later part of the campaign. This is the H3 air base you see here. It's almost 200 miles from Baghdad, but that doesn't make any difference. The United States can use this to bring in special forces troops, Rangers from Saudi Arabia and Jordan, and supplies, and leapfrog into the north of leapfrog into the north where I am in the later stages of this attack. The key reason to be up here, the Kirkuk oil fields, the word over the last week and a half from refugees flooding out of Kirkuk is that those oil fields have been mined, and the Kirkuk oil fields put out 1 million barrels of oil a day. So if there is to be a future economic system here in northern Iraq and for the entire Iraqi government, they have to save these oil fields, and the way to save that is air mobile troops and paratroopers coming in here at some given time and using the bases they take in western Iraq to resupply those helicopters coming in. So right now, no fighting in northern Iraq. The focus is on Baghdad. The next day and a half, you're going to see what some people here are calling the I-95 war, racing from Kuwait to Baghdad. I think it's about 250 miles the way they're going. Shouldn't take them too long, Lester.
All right, Fred Francis, thank you very much in northern Iraq. And as we speak and we look at the picture on the right side, sirens again are heard in Baghdad. Let me pause and see if we can hear anything else. And You can barely make out the steady whine of sirens, once again alerting the residents of Baghdad that danger may be in the air or it may not be. We have heard these before, and then nothing follows. It is just about midnight, and keep in mind the U.S. strikes of last night came just before dawn, so it will be another sleepless night in Baghdad. We'll keep our eye trained on this picture. If something happens, you'll see it. I want to update you now on what has been a burning question since last night. Is Saddam Hussein dead or alive? Was that him that we saw on Iraqi television? Here's what NBC News has learned. Right now, U.S. officials say, based on their first pass, their first look at voice recognition technology in this case, the theory is that was, in fact, Saddam Hussein. They've still got more checking to do on that. The issue of the glasses, they apparently have seen him in glasses before, not these particular ones. What that means, they're not sure. Facial recognition, again, they say is not a good, reliable way of determining whether it was him. In terms of whether it was a pre-recorded message, that is still up for debate. They noted he was using that notebook that he may have been simply have recorded several scenarios and was flipping from page to page. It's simply a good guess, but the one official says, and to put it quite bluntly, this was a serious attempt to whack him. The cruise missiles last night, early this morning, Baghdad time, struck a private house. The initial word we got is there was a meeting of perhaps of Saddam Hussein, his sons, other senior leaders. Now, the late word is they were likely sleeping. And again, the intelligence being that it was perhaps electronic intercepts, eavesdropping perhaps, that targeted, that led them to that house. They don't have any battle damage assessment per se as to who they got. But again, it was a target of opportunity described last night, and now it is clear they were going after us. Saddam Hussein. Rob Morrison is our correspondent right now, and again, we'll keep our eye on Baghdad. Rob Morrison is in Doha, Qatar. That is where Central Command is run with Tommy Franks. What is the latest you're hearing from there, Rob?
Well, speaking to one military official, Lester, getting an idea of what is going on exactly in General Tommy Franks' war room. He's there, of course, with his top military advisors, going over this battle plan and getting information from the Joint Operations Center, which is attached to the war room. The Joint Operations Center is manned by high-ranking officers, all with combat experience, and what they're doing is gathering the information and the intelligence from the field, and then, as one military commander told me, turning that information into knowledge that General Tommy Franks can use and passing it to him in his war room. As he sits there with his military advisors, he's looking at maps on the wall, he's keeping in contact with his field commanders, and he's just trying to go over the battle plan, trying to plan for any contingencies that might come up. We're still waiting for the first briefing, and we really have no idea when that might happen. I'm standing now in front of this new $1.5 million media center that's been built specifically for this operation. This is where the first briefing will happen. We weren't expecting it today, really, because we knew there was a natural order that kind of had to take place. We had to hear from the president at some point. We had to hear from British officials. We had to hear from the Secretary of Defense. Now that that has happened, and we have heard from them, we should be getting that briefing sometime, I won't say soon, but we should be getting that briefing, I would say sometime within the next 24 hours. That's the very latest here at Central Command, Lester. I'm going to send it back to you.
All right, Rob Morrison, thank you very much. We want to take you right now to Washington, where Hardball's Chris Matthews is standing by with a very special guest. Chris?
Thank you, Lester. I'm here with Jim Woolsey, James Woolsey, the former CIA director. What do you make of this fight over the picture of Saddam Hussein we've been watching this afternoon? Lester's been showing. He looks a little pudgier, perhaps, than the current Saddam Hussein, but I don't think the glasses are much of a giveaway.
Well, the thing that seems really interesting to me is the possibility that it was pre-recorded. It may not be him. It may be a double or a dubbed or something, but the pre-recording possibility, given what he said, may exist.
What's the strategy behind trying to keep a guy alive artificially by presenting him alive when he's dead?
The only thing I can think of is if they were doing something like that, it might buy them some time. But that's all. Time either for people to leave, time to do ugly stuff like use bacteriological weapons or something. They might if they thought he was dead, if everybody thought he was dead and knew he was dead, the system might collapse a lot faster.
We're not seeing real proof of life here, in other words. There's no demonstration of the person fighting out in the trenches to defend Saddam Hussein that he's there to be defended. And doesn't he have to show his life at some point that he's out there, get on radio, get on television, get seen in the streets?
I think the doubt will begin to spread if the only thing that's there is this this film, which could have been pre-recorded.
Let's talk about the attempt to grab this guy. Somebody used sort of Sopranos language today. They refer to the attempt to whack him. In other words, to kill the guy. It is an assassination in that sense. But let me ask you, that's legal now to go after a leader like that, or isn't it, under our current law?
In World War II, we'd broken the Japanese codes. We sent fighter aircraft up to shoot down Yamamoto, and we got him. And it was a very successful operation. Enemy commander in wartime, certainly.
We also got Heydrich in Germany, and we also, I think, got Darlan, although that's always questionable. Let me ask you about this question, though, the fix. How good is our technology to find a guy? Do you think it was human intel that led to this sighting?
I don't know. It could have been communications. It could have been human intel. It could have been a defector who was outside the country and had somebody, a relative, tip him off. There are any possibilities.
So it's likely that Saddam Hussein, in his dying couple of days of his regimes, is out looking for the guy that ratted him out.
Well, that would be his instinct. If he's still alive and he thinks somebody ratted him out, he would go on a killing spree. That's the way he is.
Let's talk about this more menacing question of a second Mohammed Atta. He's being called by our intelligence services, a person of perhaps Yemeni background, perhaps even Guyana. They're not quite even sure where his country of origin is. Apparently speaks English with an American accent, very well-trained pilot, could be up there in the sky right now.
That's very troubling. The ones of these people like Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, who spent time in this country and understand all the nuances of the way you can get into buildings or schools and the way you talk, all the things you pick up when you're in a society, they're in many ways the most dangerous. And if this guy is like that, he could be extremely dangerous.
Let me ask you about something that's been a part of our debate for weeks now, whether we get Turkey as a landing base opportunity. Can we do what's called shock and awe, in other words, a shuddering blow, without the help of Turkey? Well,
it would have been a little easier, somewhat easier, with the Turks in. Logistically, it would have been easier. But yes, I think we can do it. We can do it coming from Qatar. We can do it coming from across Saudi Arabia.
Former CIA Director Jim Woolsey. Back to you, Lester.
It's pronounced no foul.
All right, Chris, thank you very much. We're getting reports of a U.S. Helicopter down. I'm going to ask the producer to give me the information because I don't have it here in front of me. Jim Miklaszewski, the Pentagon, reporting a U.S. chopper is down. We don't know if it's on the Iraqi side or the Kuwaiti side. Obviously, that U.S. choppers have moved in across the border in some cases. We know inserting special operations forces. No confirmation. The initial report is this was an Apache helicopter. That, of course, is a gunship, a two-person crew. It fires the Hellfire missiles, also a very powerful chain gun in the nose of that helicopter. We don't have any indication of where this chopper was down. Certainly, this is the expectation is that we will have these kinds of reports as this war begins to progress. But again, the report that a U.S. Army Apache AH-64 helicopter is down, and I'm still waiting for confirmation as to where. It is just a report, and we will continue to follow that development. We do know that U.S. forces began prepping the way for ground troops to enter Iraq today with a very heavy artillery and rocket bombardment. No doubt Apache helicopters, if they are not already, will be a part of that. The 101st Airborne Division brought a lot of the Apaches into the theater with them. They were, in fact, very late to arrive. Many of them were arriving on ships as recently as only about a week ago. So we'll continue to cover that development as our coverage continues of this war. Just about 2.5 hours past the last airstrikes on Baghdad. Sirens heard recently. We'll continue to keep our eye. Right now, let's pause for our NBC stations to join us. Good day day to you, Lester Holt. It is 4 o'clock right now on the East Coast. It is midnight right now in Baghdad, as we've been doing all day, every 15 minutes, bringing you the latest. And the very latest right now is a breaking development regarding the apparent downing of a U.S. attack helicopter. Unclear whether it was on the Kuwait or the Iraqi side of the border. The initial indication, it was an Army Apache helicopter. That is a gunship equipped with a very powerful 30-millimeter cannon in its nose, and carries, of course, rockets. Also fires the Hellfire missile, very often used to engage with tanks. Let me pause again and allow more of our stations to join us. And welcome back, everyone, as many of our stations are joining us across the country. And let me update you as to the story we were just reporting, the apparent downing of a U.S. Apache helicopter somewhere in the Iraqi theater of operations. And in fact, the information we have now is down in Iraq. Officials telling us the helicopter reported taking gunfire. Unclear, though, whether it was shot down, forced down. The Apache carries a two-person crew. It is a gunship, an attack helicopter. It very often is used to engage enemy tanks. It has the Hellfire missile. It has other rockets it carries, and a very powerful machine gun in the nose. It is an armored helicopter to an extent against small arms, but flies low, flies rather slow. The fact that it is a helicopter, and again, the report is this chopper is down somewhere inside Iraq. There's no word on casualties, the fate of the crew. We'll continue to follow that latest development coming out of the Pentagon for us. At the same time, within the last half hour, sirens were heard wailing over Baghdad again as the bombing of the Iraqi capital appears to be near again. This was the picture you're seeing from earlier. Cruise missiles launched from U.S. and British warships. They pummeled the city. Ministry buildings, one of Saddam's many homes, also hit, and that anti-aircraft fire greeted those cruise missiles. Another front in the war is opening. U.S. forces push into southern Iraq, take control of the country's main seaport, apparently facing little resistance. Troops there reporting that many Iraqi soldiers have surrendered. No numbers right now. From the southern front to a northern one now. The Turkish parliament voting today to allow U.S. planes to use their airspace for strikes against Iraq. So far limited only to airspace. Unclear the tactical or practical advantage that will give U.S. forces as they engage Iraq in war. We also are hearing reports again that warning sirens sounding in the northern city of Mosul. We haven't heard anything about an attack there. We'll keep you up to date on that. More headlines and target Iraq coverage every 15 minutes on the quarter hour. For the very latest in the Pentagon now, and perhaps more on that downing of a U.S. Army chopper, NBC's Jeannie Ohm is at the Pentagon for us. Jeannie?
Lester, we first heard about the possibility of a U.S. helicopter down a couple of hours ago, but at that time that information was coming from Iraqi TV. But now, as you've been reporting, U.S. officials are confirming that an Apache attack helicopter appears to be down in Iraq. Now, that attack helicopter does carry 2 people on board. Again, we're still trying to confirm information. Of course, the Pentagon being very careful before they release information to absolutely confirm what has happened. In case people are confused or wondering, there was a separate incident early this morning involving a Pavlo helicopter with 6 special operations troops on board. They did have a hard landing, but they all got out okay. They're all accounted for. But this is some new information we're getting, the fact that U.S. officials are confirming that an Apache helicopter has gone down somewhere in Iraq. We're, of course, trying to get more information, and we'll pass it on as soon as we get it. Lester?
And, Jeannie, what are officials there telling you about what comes next? There was this, the expectation today would be that awe-inspiring attack. We saw the explosions in Baghdad, and then they ended.
You know, Lester, we're hearing very conflicting accounts of whether, in fact, has the war plan changed? Has it been modified? Other people saying no, you'll know shock and awe when you see it. And we're led to believe that this is all very intentional. There's sort of this general confusion out there, and perhaps to keep the Iraqis off guard as well. For weeks now, we've been hearing about this huge, massive campaign that would be underway with thousands of cruise missiles and smart bombs. And then we got word today that, you know, flexibility and intelligence is what will lead to victory, according to General Myers. So there really is sort of two trains of thought out there. Could it have happened yet, or is it being modified, or will we see it then? So it's very unclear at this point. But again, U.S. officials are telling us that they do have quite a lot of firepower available for when there is a massive air assault, if you will. We should also point out, regarding that second round of attacks, we do know now that the Tomahawk cruise missiles came from 2 British submarines as well as 2 U.S. submarines. In yesterday's attack, they came from 6 naval warships, and a total of 40 Tomahawk cruise missiles were learned. They're not releasing exactly how many were used this time around. Lester?
All right, Jeannie Ohm, thank you very much. And to follow up the British involvement, this report comes from Al Jazeera, and we've not independently confirmed it, but the report he's getting from Al Salihah Air Base in Qatar is that the Al Faw Peninsula has fallen under the control of British forces. So we'll continue to follow that development. We're also getting word here that sirens may be sounding in Kuwait City again. The element of surprise, the anxiety of the unknown certainly works both ways in this, even as we've heard sirens in Baghdad and acknowledge the restless nights folks there are living through. The folks in Kuwait equally on edge. We can tell you that the 2 missiles that were fired toward Kuwait, the U.S. government military is now confirming were down by Patriot missiles, certainly updated Patriots from what we saw in the Gulf War. I want to talk right now to MSNBC military consultant, retired Army Colonel Ken Allard, who joins me here on the set. The sirens that we're hearing in Baghdad, other places, jitters?
Absolutely.
Just not. They're not seeing anything on radar, but hearing, perhaps.
Well, you know, you want these guys to have all the jitters in the world, and there's a certain amount of nerves that go on anytime that you're into this kind of situation. So I don't expect to see anything other than what we're seeing right now. You will see these kinds of sirens going off. They could be activated simply by the Iraqis turning on their radar to find out. Is that a drone, or is that a B-2 bomber on the headed back in on us?
Let's talk very quickly about this report of an Apache helicopter down. Obviously, casualties we all know are a part of war. We don't know the status of the crew, but tell me a little bit about this chopper and the risks that it takes in its mission.
Lester, it's a flying tank. I operated with those things continuously the entire time I was in Bosnia. In fact, I don't think I ever flew without one of those guys sitting on my 6. Simply because of the fact they are an extremely deadly fighting machine during the Gulf War. That was when they really had their debut, and they were extraordinarily deadly. They are a highly capable tank killer. It used to be said that the best tank killer was another tank. Well, now we have the Apache, and that is the thing that does the job superbly well. And it's especially important when it's operating in close concert with light infantry.
Let me interrupt you. Peter Arnett is on the phone now for us. Peter Arnett from National Geographic Explorer, also helping out MSNBC. What are you hearing and seeing, Peter?
Yeah, well, Lester, we're looking across the Tigris River about a mile away to the burning wreckage of the office of Qusay Hussein, the President Saddam Hussein's younger and favored son. He is in command of security intelligence for the country and also the commander of Baghdad defenses. His office was hit 3 hours ago. It's been burning steadily ever since. Now, in addition, Lester, Iraqi television announced just recently that there was a helicopter shot down, they claim a Sikorsky, they said, at the western border of Iraq. That would be near the Jordanian border. That is Iraqi television. Maybe that can give you some enlightenment about that chopper you've been talking about.
Peter, I'm going to ask you to stay with us. I need to ask you to pause just for a moment, Peter. We need to go to Kuwait, where the air raid sirens are sounding again. Don Teague, tell us what's going on.
And I'll apologize for that loud noise right near. Now, the good news is what we're now hearing is the all-clear siren. About 5 minutes ago, the air raid sirens going off here again in Kuwait City. We put our masks on and people went for cover, but again, as you can hear right there, that's the all-clear alert now being sounded here. So whether or not it was a false alarm or whether or not there was a incoming missile that was perhaps intercepted by a Patriot, we don't know at this point, but getting an all clear right now in Kuwait City.
And that's what we want to hear, the all clear. All right, Don, we will continue to check in with you. Let's go back to Peter Arnett now in Baghdad. Peter, is there any sense of, do we know what was hit in that last attack of a few hours ago?
Well, certainly the main office of Qusay Hussein, who's President Saddam Hussein's younger favored son. He is running the security intelligence departments for the country.
also recently named to be in command of the defense of Baghdad. That big office building wiped out in the attacks 3 hours ago, that adjoins the former office of Tariq Aziz, plus a parliamentary cabinet building. Another office just opposite us here in the presidential palace compound, apparently another intelligence building. Now, the Iraqi television recently reported that one of the targets today, they didn't say when, was the home of Saddam Hussein's wife, Sajida, and his 3 daughters. They say that was destroyed, but the family did reach safety. Other than that, it's not been easy to identify other targets hit tonight, Lester. But we have noticed in the course of the past 3 hours extended periods of anti-aircraft fire in the far western suburbs of Baghdad. So that is where Republican Guard units are based, and presumably some anti-aircraft weaponry. Right now, though, for the past 20, 30 minutes, there has not been one anti-aircraft shot into the air. So it is quiet. But again, air raid sirens about 15 minutes ago, and the Pentagon is reporting that these attacks against Baghdad will continue during the night, Lester.
And Peter, I want you to pause, if you can, just one more second, because I've got some positive news regarding that Apache. U.S. officials now say the preliminary reports regarding that downed Apache helicopter, it did take gunfire. It made what they described as a hard landing. Apparently, though, was able to take off again and return to the flight. Everyone on board is reported to be okay on board that Apache. Let me go back to Peter Arnett now based on that good news. Peter, tell us what happens on the streets of Baghdad during these attacks.
Well, what is very different from the 1991 Gulf War, Lester, is that the lights of Baghdad are burning. The palace, when I say burning, they are lighted. The palace itself, the presidential palace compound, a very large area of buildings and parks, also well lit up. Our hotel lighting hasn't been turned off. So clearly, no utility targets hit tonight by this limited air raid that came earlier in the evening. The city itself, a few police cars driving around, but really nothing else. The population is hunkered down in their homes, presumably what we have seen earlier. Many troops in the streets around government buildings and manning bunkers, but otherwise the Tigris River flowing past us just a few feet away, placid, as is the city right now. Lester. You had recalled during the last attack, you recalled hearing low-flying aircraft. Were you able to get a glimpse of what apparently were the Tomahawks at all? No, we didn't see them at this point in time. It is dark, and they were presumably the weapons that we used to knock out the buildings in downtown Baghdad. We did not see any tonight. In the past war, in the Gulf War, we did see them during the daytime, but certainly not tonight. We haven't noted any, Lester. All right, Peter Arnett, thank you very much. Dana Lewis, one of our NBC correspondents with the 101st Airborne, joins us right now. Is there activity where you are, Dana?
Lester, we have just now, about 5 minutes ago, just received another siren warning that there could be an incoming missile, the same that we had earlier today when there were these missile attacks. As a result, all of the soldiers on this base now in the bunkers, they've taken cover, donned the protective gas mask, and we are waiting for word on whether indeed this is an attack and how big an attack it is, and where the missiles may have landed, or if they are, in fact, if they've landed at all, they may still be inbound at this point, because this has only been underway for about 5 minutes, as I said before.
Dana, have you heard any return fire, any sense of any sound of Patriots perhaps being fired?
I haven't, and we'll listen for that. I mean, earlier today when some of those Patriots were fired and we were in the same location, we could in fact hear them on the way out, and we heard two booms in the distant horizon. Right now all quiet, and you can see lots of soldiers on the move across this base, all in gas masks, but most of them moving into the bunkers. You know, it's been on and off and on and off in terms of mask day here, exhausting, fraying the nerves of many of the soldiers here. It started around noon, and then later in the afternoon we were at this bunker, and within an hour we had 3 different drills.
each time having to stay in the bunker, take the masks off, and then put them back on again. So far, we have not donned any of the chemical full protection suits, but that may be coming if indeed there are more of these missiles inbound.
We've heard of harassing and interdicting fire and the idea to keep the other guys up at night. Has anyone got a blink of sleep since all this began?
Well, it really started today, so people had a blink of sleep overnight, but if it continues like this, certainly I don't think many people are going to be sleeping on this base tonight. It's already after midnight here, as you know, and I would think that there's a very good chance that there could be more of these throughout the night, and every time the soldiers have got to get out of those tents, put the masks on, and come out to the bunkers, as they've done so now. This has been one of their big fears, that as troops are moving across the border, that the 101st Airborne is left behind here for the moment, still getting some of its equipment ready to go, still waiting for missions. And any of the U.S. troops on the Kuwaiti side remain a target for Saddam firing those missiles into this area. And there's also a lot of security on this base tonight. Barbed wire strung across the base, extra patrols out, also worried about infiltrations from the Iraqi side, that they may try and Lester come in here and try and hit some of the fuel or hit some of the assets on the ground before they move across the border into Iraq. Back to you.
NBC's Dana Lewis with the 101st Airborne. Dana will stay in touch and continue to watch that development, likely related to the sirens that were heard perhaps in Kuwait earlier, although they got in Kuwait City, they got the all clear sign within the last few minutes. We are swept past the quarter hour. Let's bring you up to speed, as we've been doing every quarter hour, with what's happening, the newest developments. Looks like it was a close call for the crew of an Apache helicopter. U.S. officials say it reported taking gunfire in Iraq. Did make a hard landing, apparently was able to take off again. Everyone on board now reported okay. In the start of the ground war, coalition forces said to be making significant gains today. U.S. troops did encounter some resistance from Iraqi troops, but many surrendered. The strategic Al-Fa Peninsula is now controlled by British Marines and Iraq's busiest commercial port by U.S. troops. Loud explosions rocking Baghdad earlier, an anti-aircraft fire lighting up the night sky. The bombing did not last very long, and U.S. military officials say it's not yet the start of Operation Shock and Awe, as some have dubbed it. And U.S. officials saying it's most likely Saddam Hussein, the Iraqi leader, talking on state TV after the first strike on Baghdad, which happened last night Eastern time, was in fact Saddam Hussein. Some experts thinking, though, it could have been a double, as Saddam had been a target of the cruise missile attack. But again, initial indications from U.S. officials, they believe, based on the voice, it was him. As we continue to monitor breaking news, we'll bring you up to date on the latest on Iraq again at the bottom of the hour. Right now, let's see if we can learn a bit more about the incident with the Apache helicopter and other developments at the Pentagon. Jeannie Ohm is standing by for us. Jeannie.
Lester, because there are so many people with ties to the military and loved ones abroad in the region, we want to make sure this information gets across clearly. About 30 minutes ago, U.S. officials were telling us that what they were hearing was that an Apache helicopter had reported taking gunfire and had gone down somewhere in Iraq. Well, now we can tell you that these U.S. officials are now telling us this is what happened. That Apache helicopter did, in fact, report taking fire. What happened next, it made a hard landing, but the helicopter was able to then take off and resume its flight. And the two crew members on board are said to be okay. We should remind you, this is the second time today that a U.S. military helicopter has made a hard landing in Iraq, but everyone is okay and accounted for. Again, this latest information and update now saying that the Apache helicopter at first reported to have gone down. Instead, it did report taking gunfire, made a hard landing, but then took off. So everyone's safe and accounted for. Lester?
Jeannie Ohm, thank you very much. We're joined now by MSNBC analyst and Gulf War veteran General Barry McCaffrey. General, thank you for joining us today. Your thoughts as to if this was a planned liquid campaign in terms of being able to adapt very quickly?
Well, I mean, it's an astonishing display on how Tommy Franks, with 800 people sitting in gutters, being able to orchestrate air, land, and sea forces over literally thousands of miles. Now it's the middle of the night, pitch black, thousands of armored and wheeled vehicles plunging into Iraq. All the U.S. forces using night vision goggles and infrared targeting systems and orchestrating air and artillery fire. It's a product of 15 years of hard work.
General, we have talked about psychological warfare with regard to what the U.S. has been doing to Iraqi soldiers. Does it work both ways? Dana Lewis reporting that a lot of anxiety among troops as they constantly move to the bunker and have to don their chemical protective gear.
Well, you know, clearly chemical weapons evoke a special kind of fear. You know, it's the unseen enemy. If it was artillery, high explosive coming in, I can assure you they'd be equally scared. These kids are prepared, they're well trained, they got good leadership. I wouldn't want to overstate the degree of fear. They're going to have 2 more weeks of this minimum, maybe 3 or 4 weeks, existing on 1, 2, or 3 hours sleep every 24 hours.
But to the extent that in some cases they are in fixed positions, are they more vulnerable right now?
Well, not compared to somebody driving a Bradley fighting vehicle who's out there in the dark right now engaging potentially Iraqi tanks. So, yeah, they're at risk. This entire theater of operations is going to stay dangerous to terrorist attack, to Scud missiles, chemical weapons. But they'll do okay. The Iraqis have wildly inaccurate missiles. The PAC-3 Patriot, as we're hearing, is going to work just great. And thank God we got the United States Air Force overhead, so what we're hopefully not going to see is 90 Iraqi operational aircraft trying to conduct bombing attacks, strafing runs, or chemical attacks in the deep part of the battlefield, in other words, around the Kuwaiti docks and airports.
And based on what we're seeing and hearing, the U.S. has held back with regard to its bombing in Baghdad, and I say that acknowledging anybody under those explosions and cruise missiles would not agree with me. Do you think this is designed to let the leadership and the Iraqi public know that the U.S. can crank it up or pull back at any time?
Well, I think probably more importantly, Lester, you know, we went through some of the targeting procedures and the attempt to avoid so-called collateral damage last week in the Pentagon with McChrystal and the guys that are running this campaign. Enormous efforts being made to determine what the targets really are and go after those targets. So, you know, there's more than 7,000 sites that are protected areas that we're going to try and not hit. You know, as Lieutenant General Mike Short's been saying on the show, you know, you can probably never lose the war because you didn't drop one bomb, but you might lose it because you dropped the wrong bomb. And I think that's the way they're going into this. Isolate the leadership, go after the sources of support for Saddam Hussein, nail the command and control system for the Republican Guards, the 6 divisions that are keeping this cruel regime in power. And I think that's what they're trying to achieve. All
right, General Barry McCaffrey, I always appreciate your insight. Thank you for joining us. Another story that we've been bringing you today, as the U.S., of course, on alert for terror. We've learned the FBI is on the hunt. A gentleman they'd like to speak to who they believe is an al-Qaeda operative in the United States. They put out the word today that they were looking for Adnan el-Shukr-Juma, a 27-year-old man from Saudi Arabia. We're now told there was a raid that took place in the hunt for him in Miramar, Florida, and Mark Potter is there now to update us on that story. Mark?
Hi, Lester. Well, earlier this afternoon, federal agents came to this house, indeed, in Miramar, Florida, which is near Fort Lauderdale, looking for a man described as Adnan G. el-Shukr-Juma. He is said to be 27 years old, either from Yemen or Guyana, and he is believed by federal authorities to be a major operative of al-Qaeda, perhaps on the level of Muhammad Atta. Now, the agents came to this house and spoke to a man who told us that he is Adnan's brother, and who claims that Shukr-Juma has not been in the United States for several years, that he is in Morocco with his family. But sources tell NBC News that they believe that Shukr-Juma was in the United States perhaps after September 11th. They do not know, however, whether he is still in the country. Their biggest concern, though, is that they believe that he may now be involved in plots on a large scale to put together attacks either here or abroad for al-Qaeda, and they certainly want to pick him up just as quickly as they can. Now, in a bulletin to law enforcement officials around the country, federal authorities are describing him as a pilot, a man who went to flight school, who speaks English flawlessly, and who travels on multiple passports and uses different names. Perhaps he has come in and out of the country. Again, they don't know that. The one thing that they do want to say is that there is no specific information now on a threat that can be linked to this man, but again, they want to pick him up because they believe that he may be planning something, and they believe that he is highly placed in Al-Qaeda, information that has been developed rather recently by intelligence officials, in part through interviews that they have done with other captured Al-Qaeda operatives. Now, the agents were here in this house for about an hour, and then they left, but they are still in the neighborhood. In fact, looking down the street, I can see them gathered about 4 houses down. They've been going up and down, apparently canvassing this middle-class neighborhood, which also contains a mosque. The brother, by the way, says that his brother, Shukr Juma, is not a pilot. In fact, he laughed at that when we asked him about it. He also said that he is not a terrorist, but law enforcement officials are quite serious about finding him. They are still here in the neighborhood, and they are saying absolutely nothing to us publicly about why they are here. Lester, back to you.
All right, Mark Potter, thank you very much for the report out of Florida regarding the hunt for an Al-Qaeda operative believed to be in the United States. The offensive now back to Iraq is being coordinated at the U.S. Central Command headquarters in Qatar. We'll be going there a bit later to get an update, but right now we want to get a sense of what is being said and heard around the world as the U.S. continues its war with Iraq, and for that we go to Natalie Morales. Natalie.
Lester, I'm monitoring the listening post on Iraqi television as well as Al Jazeera television, which is independently owned, but Iraqi television is state-owned, so very much under Saddam Hussein's control. It's broadcasting little to nothing of the images of war that we've been seeing, the air raids 2 hours ago, but it is reporting information which is not confirmed yet by U.S. officials. They say 72 cruise missiles have been fired on Iraq so far, although they report some were intercepted, and they're also reporting that 4 Iraqi military officials have been killed, 5 others wounded. Again, we do not have confirmation of that from military officials. From what we've heard, there have also been no reports on Saddam Hussein's condition or that of his top leadership. And as we've been reporting, U.S. intelligence officials believe he and some of those under him, including perhaps his 2 sons, may have been wounded in that initial raid last night. Iraqi TV is also not broadcasting any alerts to its civilians. In fact, the Iraqi Interior Minister Mahmoud al-Ahmad, who was interviewed earlier, tells the Iraqi people and shop owners to get back out on the streets and to open their stores to get back to normal life. Of course, we know it is very far from that, but here's more of that interview translated by MSNBC Al Jazeera translator Jacob Kiriakis.
There will be a great celebration, and our people will sing and dance over the dead bodies of the evil ones that will be scattered all over Iraq. Iraq will be a furnace to those evils.
The